Brawlhalla is great. At its core, it has an amazing concept. A free-to-play fighter that you can quickly pick up with your friends that's easy to play and easy to have fun in. The initial premise is enticing, but if you take a deeper look at the game, you will start to notice that there are many flaws that plague the game. If you like Brawlhalla and you still decide to watch this video, then I thank you. I appreciate you for hearing me out on my experiences with this game, what makes it so good, and what holds it back. My goal isn't to make anyone think less of this game, just to think more about it. After all, it's important to be critical of the games and media we enjoy, and there is a lot to enjoy about Brawlhalla, so I hope to give credit where credit is due. And as a player coming with more than 4,000 hours, I hope that it's clear that my criticism comes from a place of good faith. I'm only here because I really think Brawlhalla could have been better than it currently is. But with all of that said, let's move into the video. If there's something unique about Brawlhalla, then it's undoubtedly the accessibility it has. As of now, Brawlhalla has made its way onto a multitude of platforms, the following being PC, PS4, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, as well as iOS and Android devices, all of which allow crossplay. Add to that the fact that the game is capable of being run on literal potato specs, while still running smooth as hell, and you have a pretty accessible game on your hands. Like, you could ask your friend if he feels like playing Brawlhalla, and if he doesn't own a console or a computer, he could literally play it on his mobile phone if he wanted, and he could still beat your ass despite being a beginner. This is partly because of a few key distinctions in Brawlhalla's core gameplay. Like, look! This guy can literally jump up to the death barrier, and not only he can do that, everyone can do that. And as one might deduce from that, the characters in this game all share many similarities, which makes the game much more approachable for beginners. And it is details like these that are the reason why Brawlhalla is such a great entryway into the fighting game genre. Other fighting games, such as Smash Ultimate, aren't nearly as forgiving with their mechanics and complexity, and as such, most players usually drop these games early due to their sheer difficulty. And this is despite the fact that Smash isn't even considered all that difficult for beginners, at least when compared to other fighting games such as Tekken. What's surprising for a free-to-play game though, is the fact that the game boasts a mountain of playable characters, 62 to be exact as of Vivi's release. Now at first this sounds like an endless amount of opportunities with all of the things you could learn, but as I've already said earlier, the characters are all pretty similar in practice, so let me go into a bit more detail on why that is. In Brawlhalla, all of the characters are assigned 2 of the 14 available weapons. This is accompanied with an unarmed moveset that is universally distributed to all characters of the game. This in turn makes it much easier to pick up new characters, since instead of having to learn an entirely unique moveset for each and every single character, you might have already familiarized yourself with some of the characters' weapons, which makes for a much more pleasant transition between characters you do and don't know. And if you want to be a really big man, you can just play unarmed only, where you just give people a proper smackdown. Not that I recommend it though. Unarmed is pretty busted though, just know that. But this isn't Brawlhalla's only strength. Far from it even. It's also a really good game to just quickly hop onto. Boot up the queue and 10 seconds later you already have a game on your hand. Perfect for a quick session to pass the time. You will rarely have to wait for longer than 30 seconds in this game, unless you play in a low density region like Japan, or play in an ELO range that's barely inhabited, like 200 to 600 or 2600 ELO. And while you could argue that this should be the standard for any fighting game, I can certainly say that some games really struggle with queuing healths, sadly. But even if you aren't interested in the online aspect of the game, but just want to play with your friends in a couch party, the game also offers a place for you, with its many custom game modes, all of which are accessible during offline play. So yes, you won't just be locked out of the game's content when your internet decides to explode in on itself. And some of the more popular game modes like Brawl, for example, have even gotten a cult following over the years because of how fun they are, with community hosted tournaments and the sort. Horde, on the other hand, for example, has people competing for the highest wave, and Morphish just... oh boy, what the hell is that? Oh, what the fuck? Yeah. Just ignore what happened to that guy. He'll heal up just fine in hospital with Rayman. Don't ask me what happened to him. But as our healing up, I think it's time for us to move on and discuss one of Brawlhalla's most important topics for this discussion: movement. Movement is what makes Brawlhalla's gameplay unique. Without it, the game would lose its flair and identity. I will explain the following mechanics as they mostly comprise Brawlhalla's movement as a whole. If you've already played this game extensively or simply don't care about this however, then feel free to skip to the time shown on screen. But if you want a better understanding of the game's flaws, then I do recommend for you to watch this section of the video regardless, as a lot of the points I bring up later in this video are based on this information. But with that out of the way, let's talk about Brawlhalla's movement mechanics, starting with the aerial moveset. In Brawlhalla, your aerial moveset consists of 3 jumps, 1 to 2 dodges, and 1 recovery. These can all be used in any order interchangeably. Also, whenever you're out of jumps and get hit, the game will give you an extra jump to recover back on stage. This can, funnily enough, lead to players unintentionally saving their opponents, however, by attacking them with low force moves such as throws. Secondly, chase dodges. Whenever you hit your opponent, you're given the ability to chase dodge twice in the direction you're facing. If you're stuck in the aerial state, however, you only have access to 1 chase dodge. Chase dodges are a key part of Brawlhalla, as they allow for you to recover back on stage more easily, as well as making a massive pool of Brawlhalla's combos possible. Third, dashes. Dashes are your main way of quickly traversing the ground, but their only use doesn't come from just running fast. They also apply special properties to both jumps and attacks. For example, dashing inwards while starting an attack tends to make combos more consistent and easier to hit. The more useful property here, however, comes in the form of dash jumping. That is because dash jumping has less vertical movement, which puts you in the perfect position to use a lot of Brawlhalla's aerial attacks on grounded players. Fourth, slide charging. Another use for dashes, funnily enough, comes in the form of slide charging. Slide charging is the act of running off a stage or platform while loading up a signature. Then, as you're drifting off the stage, you can let go and have your signature do its thing. As a side note, however, you can also do this by running off normally, but this is harder to do, so most newer players tend to make use of dashes here. On the top of floating through the air though, fifth, gravity cancelling. Gravity cancel is one of, if not the most unique feature in Brawlhalla. So you might ask, what is gravity cancelling? And well, it's likely the one thing that has made most people think, holy fuck, there's a cheater! What the fuck is he? Anyways, to gravity cancel, you need to spot dodge midair. This allows for you to input a grounded move in the air. Neat, right? You can use this to gimp people in the air, pressure your opponents, or heck, even make completely new combos up with it that weren't possible before. And if that isn't cool, then I don't know what is. But if you look the other way for me, we have 6, X-pivoting, a form of movement manipulation. What it does is, it cancels all of your forward momentum when you reverse an attack. And while this might only apply to some attacks in the game, it's a common tech that affects high-level gameplay quite a lot, as it enables you to play more safely, as well as making some new combos possible. Another mechanic that exists in Brawlhalla is platform cancelling, which is most often referred to as edge cancelling in the community. This is not to be mistaken with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate's ledge or edge cancelling, however, as Brawl's iteration of edge cancelling is the act of doing any down input, be that light or signature, while inside of a platform's hitbox. What this will do is turn your aerial move into a grounded one. The more important aspect of this, however, is that this also applies to dashes, which in turn allows for a higher skill ceiling when it comes to movement. In 8th, we have exhausted recoveries. To use those, you first have to use your normal recovery. After that, you get the option to convert any one of your leftover jumps into an exhausted recovery. What's important to know about exhausted recoveries though is that they have different properties from their original counterpart. These can span from them covering less vertical distance, their hitboxes being different from the original, some actually being faster than the original even, and some of them sending you to your demise when you hit the ceiling with them. Yeah, that's actually a common trend with them. But besides that, exhausted recoveries are definitely a more niche feature, but they do have their uses. For example, you could convert your jump into an exhausted blasterous recovery to cross a longer horizontal distance than with a jump. On the topic of recovering back on stage though, 9th, wall slip. Wall slip is a mechanic that's supposed to stop the player from camping on the walls by automatically stripping them out of all of their jumps. This is indicated by 3 exclamation marks appearing above your head. Originally, this mechanic triggered after 15 jumps, but this number was later knocked down to a total of 9 jumps to make it more difficult for people to do whatever this is. The only ways to reset this counter, however, is for either hitting your opponent, being the one who gets hit, or entering the grounded state. But I think with that, I should have covered just about everything that has to do with Brawlhalla's movement mechanics. So to summarize in simpler terms again, the game is built upon an array of simple systems that on their own are easy to understand. But it is when they all interlock each other to create a more complex experience that the game really becomes something unique. And while I've left out some details as they're not necessary for the sake of a discussion, this should about give you a scope of how simple, yet complex complicated Brawlhalla can become when all of its mechanics are compounded on one another. But with that out of the way, it's finally time to talk about some of the other neat features that Brawlhalla pulls off really well. One of the most unique features about Brawlhalla is its spectator mode, and to give credit where credit is due, Blue Mammoth Games definitely nailed this one. Having a single lobby where people can congregate to play or spectate matches is exactly how a game like this should be. It features an in-game chat that spectators can use with ease, and it basically provides the user with anything they could ask for. Another thing that a lot of people yearn for in fighting games is the ability to play with a friend, be that casually or competitively. Luckily, Brawlhalla offers that very feature in the form of ranked and friendly 2v2. And while sure, basically every fighting game under the sun offers 2v2 tournaments, they usually tend to be community hosted. Most fighting games simply don't offer a public 2v2 game mode where you can quickly queue up a match, and that's because most of, if not all fighting games are designed around the fact that it's a 1v1 matchup. Brawl, on the other hand, works pretty handily as a 2v2 fighting game for quite a lot of reasons actually. The first of which, I would argue, is because of its slower nature. Now don't get me wrong, Brawlhalla is by no means a slow game, so let me explain it in clearer terms. The main reason why Brawlhalla's 2v2 works so well is because most of the moves have a lot of active frames. There are so many attacks that'll pin your opponent in place before knocking it away, which makes it much easier for your teammate to react and catch your opponent out of your move. Some examples of these moves would be Spear Endlight, Blaster's Endlight, or Sword Endlight for example. I don't know, they really love making endlights these type of moves. Meanwhile, in other fighting games like Smash Bros, almost every move launches instantly, and there's just no way of reacting to that. This makes it nigh impossible to work together with your teammate in any reasonable way or fashion, and this problem applies to almost every other fighting game as well. That's why most fighting games turn 2v2 into a glorified 1v1 mode, but with 2 matches going on at once. Now, I won't say that this is a perfect system, and there is a certain cost the game is paying for this, but I will go into more detail about that later on. But if you asked me, I would probably say that Brawlhalla is the best 2v2 fighting game by a long shot. The next most important point would probably be Brawlhalla's mobility. I mean, I've just gone into detail about what the game allows you earlier. Free jumps, dashes, and so on, you know. But this movement kit allows you the freedom of basically going anywhere on the stage, which in turn also gives you the ability to easily make follow-ups on the spot with your teammate, even from weirder positions. Then there is Brawlhalla's fairly simple weapon system. The advantage this simplicity gives is that you'll most likely already be familiar with most of the weapon's moves, either because you've played the weapon yourself at some point, or because you've already fought it hundreds of times in the past. And since you're going to be at least somewhat familiar with every weapon, it'll make it much easier for you to get used to your teammate's moveset. The game is nearly as elaborate, where every character is unique. I mean, hell, there are 12 sword characters. You're going to see this weapon often enough. There aren't nearly as many characters that you'll have to learn from scratch just because they have an entirely new moveset. You basically just have to get familiar with a weapon's normal moveset, and you're pretty well set from that point on in 2v2. The last thing I'd have to bring up though would be the fact that there's no attack DI in Brawlhalla. And while this might not sound important at first, because of this, Brawlhalla's team combos can work consistently. Meanwhile, in other games, consistent team combo setups simply don't exist because the opponent can slightly affect the trajectory they fly at. But with that, I covered most of the reasons why Brawlhalla's 2v2 just works well, in my opinion, to this. So moving on, what I want to bring up next is a really unique feature that I haven't quite seen in any other fighting game yet. As mentioned earlier, each character has 2 weapons as well as their unarmed state. In total, there are 2 ways of losing your weapon. The first occurs when your character gets beaten to the point of death. What's the second option is throwing your weapon away. Yes, you heard right. Throwing your only means of defending yourself away can be used as an extremely versatile tool in this game. And from my experience, weapon throws serve multiple functions on the battlefield. But as it requires me to go a bit more in depth about them, I will discuss this in the gameplay flaws section of this video instead of here. But what I will cover here are some of the mechanics that Brawlhalla doesn't have. As there isn't a real reason to go in-depth on these, I would say it's time to have a quick lightning round of common fighting game features that aren't present in Brawl. So let it start. Blocks and parries? Those go out of the window here, buddy. We don't have those here. Combo breakers? More like break these nuts. Meter management? Bro, have you even looked at the screen? I don't think I'm even seeing meters here, bro. Guard crush? The only thing getting crushed here are your dreams of ever finding a woman. Super and ultra moves. Have you seen how lukewarm fucking weak these attacks are? Oh, what the fuck? Throw escapes? The only thing that you're throwing here is your only means of defending yourself. Moron. Stunner dizzying? Well, you might as well just consider that a feature because of how broken some things are in this game. Tripping? Okay, no joke though. I am so glad this feature isn't in Brawlhalla. Not sure who came up with that horrible idea. High and low hit mix-ups. I'm gonna be honest, your opponents in this game are going to be fucking bunny straight out of CSGO regardless of this feature existing or not, and I'm not even joking. And 10th, projectile reflection. Well, that shit is in the game. Oh wait, they scrapped that video. Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. Let's fucking go. And yeah, that's it with the lightning round. Now, you should know some of the things that Brawlhalla doesn't have. And with the end of my personal antics, I think it's finally time to conclude the first part of this video and actually summarize what Brawlhalla's strengths are. Brawlhalla is easy to learn but impossible to master. The game isn't about spending a million hours learning every advanced technique in the game, knowing each and every character in and out. It's more so based on reading your opponent and knowing what course of action will do the job best. It is extraordinarily accessible because of its low device requirements, cross-playability, and it just being a free game in general. It makes for a great experience with friends due to its inclusion of party gamers, and it generally supports a player base that prefers a more casual experience with friends and family. At the same time, it also caters to people who seek out a more competitive experience with its ranked game modes and its huge tournament prize pools. The learning curve is satisfying, and transitioning to a new character is much more lenient because of the way the character's kits are designed. It's also an amazing game to randomly boot up because of its lightning fast queues. At the same time, it features interesting mechanics like defying gravity, ooh, or slight charging attacks. Brawlhalla has a vast amount of movement options, which allows for a gameplay experience like no other, which is what got me and many others invested into the game to begin with. But that just about wraps up Brawlhalla's strengths and the first half of the video. The shorter one at that. Oh wait, what the... You're telling me there's a shorter one? Oh, why the fuck is there so much left? I'm immense pain, but I have finally finished it. Brawlhalla undoubtedly features numerous qualities that prove its immense amount of potential, but as many great things as it has to show for itself, it also pays some flaws. And there is a lot of material to talk about here, so I will cut this into the following 5 chapters: non-issues, gameplay flaws, subjective issues, a recap on the past, and development issues. So without further ado, let's jump into this. Movement is a defining feature that makes Brawlhalla out as a game, but it is equally so a factor that contributes to its very own detriment, is how you could view this problem, but I think that there's a bit more nuance to this, so let me build up some context before giving any conclusions. For those of you who have already played the game and were eerily attentive on the game's movement mechanics section, you might have realized how I've specifically left out an explanation for Brawlhalla's dodge. I did talk about chase dodges though, and the reason for that is because of how important it is to this discussion in specific. To explain in simple terms, Brawlhalla gives you a lagless omnidirectional dodge that is near unpunishable, aka a dodge that can either keep you in one spot or go in all 8 directions without a noticeable pause or recovery time. Sounds more complicated than it is, but yeah. But to put simply, in this game, there's nothing that can beat the dodge. It is an absolute godsend for any playstyle, as it not only is your best defensive tool, but it is also your best offensive tool. Its presence simply cannot be ignored when you play this game. And while people have tried to propose fixes to Brawlhalla's dodge, all of the suggestions would entail fundamental changes in how Brawlhalla is played, which automatically renders most of, if not all of these suggestions impractical for the game. But just because I paint dodge in a bad light doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't balanced. Quite the contrary actually. Dodge is balanced precisely around the fact that it's incredibly broken in a vacuum. To put simply, dodge isn't balanced around how it can be used, but it is balanced around when it can be used. It is the most vital resource you have on the field, and you have to base your entire playstyle around how you manage and use it, because it can be used to escape out of bad situations, dodge after your opponent's attacks, it can bait opponents into making mistakes, and you even use it to gravity cancel. It is such a versatile mechanic to the point where you basically want it at all times, and this is where its cooldown comes into play. Using your dodge badly or just outright wasting it at the wrong moments will get you punished, and and that's basically what Brawlhalla's gameplay revolves around. What's important to note as well is that dodge is only omnidirectional in the air, so it isn't completely impossible to predict at all times either. Pair that with its active frames and cooldown, and it is actually a reactable move that you can predict and punish. But even though the dodge can be used aggressively, it is being used less and less as an oppressive or baiting tool. For one, because of the faster movement introduced into the game, dash landing, I won't explain that though, and secondly, because of the player base's overall improvement, because as the community improves, people will get a better understanding of how and when to utilize a dodge effectively and when it's bad. Now, is Brawlhalla the first game to do this? Absolutely not. A quick example would be the burst in most 2D fighting games like Guilty Gear, Dragon Ball FighterZ, with their frame 1 hit in all direction burst, which can be used as a combo extender or as a get off of me tool. In a vacuum, all of these are incredibly broken, but the fact that they're all on a cooldown means you get punished for not using them correctly or not having them available. Now, a real example for a frame 1 unpunishable omnidirectional get off of me attack that can be used both offensively and defensively would be Fox's Shine in Melee, and the fact that you have a nearly non-existent cooldown in this version of dodge is what makes Fox, or for that matter, the move, so incredibly broken. And this is where you have to make an important distinction. It's the fact that some of these tools are more important than others, and this present balance with imbalance is a tool that is used by many games. Heck, even Melee thrives off of that very philosophy with its Shine, even if it was accidental. In a way, every fighting game usually relies on mechanics to create a rock paper scissors game where one action will counter another, but Brawlhalla doesn't have such mechanics. Instead, it creates its rock paper scissors scenarios with its movement instead. It is up to you as a player if you want to use your movement really oppressively to run away from your opponent, or to use it to get in and out of your opponent's range to bait them into making a mistake by engaging you, all of which are the 3 most prevalent playstyles in Brawlhalla: aggressive, passive, and parry play. But even though this rock paper scissors concept works great for Brawlhalla, it's where a lot of people's hate for this game stems. People hate passive play because they want to fight, and being passive sounds like the antithesis to fighting them. Meanwhile, others hate aggressive play because it looks like the opponents are just running them down, which takes no skill in their eyes. And people hate parry play because it's infuriating to play against if done correctly, especially because it makes your opponent look more cocky than actually good. And this is what makes arguing about Brawlhalla's movement so difficult. One side will argue that movement is the reason Brawlhalla sucks ass, taking sides for what they like and dislike. Meanwhile, others will mindlessly complain, saying that everyone is utilizing playstyles that take no skill. But in the end, it all leads back to the fact that Brawlhalla's gameplay revolves around its movement. And if I had to make a case for it from an objective perspective, it's honestly not as broken as people paint it to be. People complaining about Brawlhalla's movement is more an argument that stems from personal biases, and because of this, it all basically comes down to how you perceive it as a player. But what am I trying to convey with this point? Well, it's that people paint Brawlhalla's movement out as a problem when it really isn't. If anything, the issue lies more in the fact that it can be mishandled by players, because it is entirely up to the player's hands whether he wants to utilize these tools to play extremely safe, parry, or painfully aggressive. And while you could argue that players shouldn't even have the ability to mishandle a mechanic, I feel like that's setting an unrealistic standard. Brawlhalla's movement giving you the ability to run away like a madman, and some people taking advantage of that, shouldn't be the reason that Brawlhalla's movement gets nerfed. Yes, these problems are a byproduct from Brawlhalla's excessive freedom in movement, but movement is what makes the game unique, and sometimes that's a price a game must pay. I believe that the game would be off much worse if they tried to balance the game in a way where passive play just wasn't possible altogether. I think it's a blessing that Brawlhalla has a diverse set of playstyles. Yes, I consider passive, parry, and aggressive play to be diverse. And if you limited Brawlhalla's movement, you would also in turn limit the amount of playstyles you can choose from. And as much of a personal gripe I have against passive play, I do think that it'd be a net loss to limit Brawlhalla's movement just to fix it. What I want to discuss in association with movement and playstyles, however, are the reasons why players choose to play one or the other playstyle. And if you had to ask me, I would honestly say that nowadays, the most influential factor would be Brawlhalla's pro scene. I don't think it's crazy of me to assume that Blue Mammoth Games heavily emphasizes the esport aspects of Brawlhalla. I mean, it's a fighting game, why would they not? And well, when you plaster competitive play all over your game and people see the best of the best play your game, it is normal to react by saying, wow, I want to be able to do that, and the easiest way of achieving that goal is through reenacting what pro players do. It's how most players learn, and since these players are seen by thousands of other players, it doesn't matter how they'll play. It can be the most skilled gameplay you will see for decades, or it could be the most atrocious, shitty, and awful gameplay that you've ever seen in this game. If you're at the top, people will follow suit and try to recreate what you're doing. Why, you might ask? Because it works! But if pro players have such a massive effect on the community's general behavior, that begs the question, what came before them? I mean, back in 2016 and 2017, Brawlhalla's tournaments were nearly as massive as they are now, and content creators were far and few between as well. And, well, my answer to that question would be a very popular form of Brawlhalla content back then. Montages. Now, as someone who's been around for long enough to see a lot of things come and go in this community, I would definitely say that seeing montages slowly fade out of existence is one of the sadder ones. I know that not everyone watched them or knew about them even, but I feel like they still had a profound impact on the player base back then. Personally, I still remember how I always entered the game, not to achieve the highest rank and become the best player, but to learn new techniques that look cool, all with the mindset that there's this small, teeny tiny chance that I could maybe make it into a montage, because back then the incentive to hit a clip was massive, because if you made it into a video, you were going to be seen by thousands of people in what was still a fairly small community. And I feel like a lot of people have lost the spark of motivation to do cool shit for the sake of doing cool shit. But that's also partly to blame because of the community's general improvement. I think anyone who has tried hitting clips in the past knows that it's so much harder to hit clips because people play more optimally nowadays. Pair that with the fact that esports gets more attention nowadays, along with Twitch highlights and YouTube shorts, and you've officially concocted a recipe to incentivize people not to play cool and fancy, but instead smart and optimized. And well, the final nail in the coffin is just the fact that the community isn't as small as it used to be. It doesn't feel as special to be featured in a montage anymore. Now, does that mean that people just don't play for clips anymore? No, of course not. There will always be some exceptions to a rule, but it just seemed like a more common thing for people to attempt back then. And while you could say that montages are just a part of Brawlhalla's nostalgic past, I still feel like montages were a core part of Brawlhalla's identity, and seeing them fizzle out of existence is honestly saddening. But that's a personal problem for me to deal with. But to conclude, movement is and isn't a problem at the same time, and that is a reality that we all have to face. Most people will either view it as a problem or just not care about it. And if you believe that Brawlhalla needs to change its movement, then I'll sadly have to tell you, I doubt there's any way to fix this quote-unquote problem unless we get the release of Brawlhalla 2, Electric Boogaloo that is. So the only option that those people have is to wait it out and see how Blue Mammoth Games might balance movement in the future. And with that, we just about discussed everything I have to say on movement, and we can finally move on to the gameplay flaws. Yeah, there aren't any other non-issues for me to list. This is the only thing that was there. So without further ado, let's jump into the many gameplay flaws that Brawlhalla has. Now, where should I begin here? Well, to put simply, the hitboxes in Brawlhalla are weird. Okay, that's probably not the right way to put it, but the hitboxes and hurtboxes in Brawlhalla don't accurately depict the visuals on screen. Neither your attacks or your character's hitboxes are what you're actually seeing right now. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, as you might see, in this game, all of the hitboxes are formed with circles. Like, yeah, actually. Now, you could argue, but Michi, other games do that as well. And yeah, that's a totally valid argument to make. I mean, hell, even Smash Bros.' hitboxes come in the form of circles, but most of, if not all, fighting games usually tend to have more realistic character hitboxes than, well, a circle. And to be completely fair, this most likely is the case due to cost reasons, because actually making the hitboxes and hurtboxes accurately represent what you're seeing in-game would be an absurdly tall task to make, especially when you take into account the fact that BMG would have to adjust the hitboxes every time a move gets updated. And I personally think that's a bit too much to ask of them. But I've left out one important detail, and that is the fact that I'm talking about Brawlhalla before it became such a popular game. This argument only really works on the pretense that Blue Mammoth games just can't afford to create more accurate hitboxes, and I completely understand why the developers cut corners like this in the past, but I just can't really say that they have a good reason to do it nowadays. I mean, Brawlhalla has flourished into a pretty successful game. I think it's reasonable to argue that they should go back to fix some of the older problems in Brawlhalla, especially since they now have access to the required resources. And for a long time, there have been quite a few people who have yearned for realistic hurtboxes, with some threads even explaining how it could be implemented or what it could look like in practice. Now, what I originally set up here is an argument for them to, well, implement more realistic character hurtboxes or hitboxes even. But to be completely frank here, I do not believe in the slightest that these are the real cause for Brawlhalla's problems. Don't get me wrong, in some cases hitboxes can be absolutely stupid, but more often than not, the hitboxes are already accurate enough as is. I thought about the concept of adding realistic hurtboxes to characters, and the conclusion I've come to afterwards was that there really wasn't any good reason to do it. First of all, it's just a lot of work to implement it. It's as if we'd be asking BMG to make an investment with no return to it, and that's absurd to ask. And even if they did pull through and did it, they would still have to maintain that quality in all of Brawlhalla's future updates, which makes this proposal even harder to vouch for. Now, I might sound like a raving lunatic right now saying that adding realistic hurtboxes isn't an addition that should be done, but what I'm saying here is that Blue Mammoth Games simply has no reason to do it, and that's already ignoring the fact that the character circle hurtbox is unique to Brawl. Like, think about it. It has been a staple of the game since, well, forever, and in at least 95% of cases, it doesn't even matter if your hurtbox is a circle or your body, you would still get hit. It's unexpectedly rare for someone to actually hit the dead air of your hitbox, so this simply isn't the issue I want to point out. And to add insult to injury, if the developers did actually decide to add realistic hurtboxes, they could unintentionally restrict the creative freedom they have on the skins they make. And now you might ask, okay, but why? And well, actually, let me go on a tangent. Think about it like this. As of right now, the circle hurtbox is distributed across the entire cast indiscriminately. The game does not care if you're a giant or a mouse. You'd still be assigned the same hurtbox. The problem that comes with realistic hurtboxes is that BMG has now set a certain expectation. The expectation that your hitbox is going to accurately depict your character. The thing is, with the current system, your skin could be way bigger than the other characters, and you'll usually just scoff at it. But the moment BMG tries to be accurate with their hitboxes, skins will undoubtedly be in a weird position. And here they'd be put up with three options. The first would be for skins to just simply be an exception, to simply ignore these problems and treat skins just like they do now. The second would be to adjust the hitbox for every skin, but not only would that be an absolute nightmare, because good lord, they have way too many skins, but it would also make skins in Brawlhalla, unironically, pay to win. And the third would be to simply adjust skins to the hitbox's sizes, but as I said, this would limit creativity, and it is for these reasons that I personally would argue against the additions of realistic character hurtboxes. But even then, that still wouldn't fix the problems that Brawlhalla's hitboxes actually have. As I've alluded to earlier, I think that there are other more responsible problems for Brawlhalla's issues. But before I talk about those more damaging ones, let me bring up one of the funnier ones first. Introducing elevating attacks. For the sake of simplicity, however, I will refer to these as hops. The reason hops occur is because there's a shift in the player's hurtbox when doing a certain attack. A common example being something like Axe Endlight. It's just that the slight shift in the player's hurtbox causes two major issues. The first being that it can cause attacks that are supposed to hit airborne players to hit grounded players instead. And the second problem is that, well, how should I put it? They cause the hopping players to simply jump over the hitboxes of some attacks. You didn't hear me wrong, you just jump over them. Now, I don't know who thought that this was a good idea, but sweet Jesus Christ, as a player I can only say that this is the dumbest shit ever.
What is wrong with this game? Do you see this? Look at it without the hitboxes. Like, that should have hit. That should have hit. Look, he's touching his foot. He's touching his foot. What the heck?
In my opinion, something like this should never happen. It just doesn't feel like an intended feature, but it is. And it's so frustrating. Like, let me ask you this. Should someone dodge an attack for whiffing their move? Obviously not. It unintentionally rewards people for the wrong reasons and it causes more harm than good. And because of this, I beg you, BMG, please get rid of this. Please don't make moves that elevate your hurtbox even if it fits the animation, because it genuinely feels like you're getting sucker punched every time it causes you to miss. It's like, the negative consequences of this feature just far outweigh the positives, and for that reason, I'd rather see them removed from the game than stay and cause even more damage. Next up, I want to point out hitboxes in relation to their animation, and the issues I see with them. But before that, let me introduce you to our victim of today's scene, Red Raptor, and his unparalleled stomp of doom. Now, at first glance you might think, this attack looks completely ridiculous, but oh boy, are you wrong. And to prove that, I shall open your eyes to a world of incredible wonders and imagination. Yeah, the image you were seeing that whole time, this entirely oversized attack, yeah, it has no hurtbox. Now, for those who still don't get what I'm going at, I want to point attention to how misleading the visuals can be in Brawlhalla. There are so many moves that make you think they'd still hit, but more often than not, the hitbox itself has already worn out. Now, this obviously is for the sake of balancing, since some moves would probably be way too good for what they are if their visual depiction was actually accurate to the in-game hitboxes, but isn't it weird when you see your opponent phasing straight through your attacks just like that? I mean, we're playing a competitive game here, right? To me, it just seems like that's something taken straight out of an unpolished game. Like, in a perfect world, a move's hitbox should be present as long as the visuals are being shown, even if it's toward the end of the attack's animation. And I know that I'm making a tall order here, as it would take an astonishing amount of time to implement. And to be completely frank, I doubt this will ever happen. But I feel like this would be a universally appreciated change to the game, assuming the game's balancing wasn't relevant to the argument, as it prevent a lot of the visually absurd or heck, jarring even things that can happen with Brawlhalla's current hitboxes. Human history, it's just not real.
What is this?
You use a throw, it stops me. I exhaust recovery. You start to ground pound, and at the perfect moment, both of our hitboxes hit, so it clashes. Fast forward, and you ground pound again. Miss me by a single frame. And he hit you and get saved from it.
I actually need that recorded.
It's actually right.
Man?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. It would undoubtedly be one of the most impactful gameplay updates that Brawlhalla could see, but as I've already implied, there is no real payback for the immense amount of effort that this would take to implement. Not that it'll stop me from bringing this up regardless though. But I'd still love to see the developers at least acknowledge the suggestion in one way or another on their bucket list of potential updates that could increase Brawlhalla's quality. Anyways, as I've already mentioned, other games also use circles to depict their hitboxes, one notable example being Smash Bros. And while Smash also has its own moments of absurdity, I still feel like the game has a much higher degree of polish when it comes to hitboxes. Now the question that comes up is, why? Why does it feel more polished? I mean, if you think about it, both Brawlhalla and Smash basically work on the same wavelength, and so I gave it a lot of thought, and the conclusion that I've come to is honestly quite simple, leading back to one of the reasons why Brawlhalla is such a great 2v2 fighting game. It's because of the sheer amount of active frames that most moves have. Now, at first this might sound stupid, so let me give you an example. Picture this. The stupid skeleton here called Azuf charges his crooked ass bow and proceeds to summon the spawns of hell itself, and you think to yourself, I'm fine. But because of how long the move sticks around, you're still capable of falling, jumping, or heck, even running into it if you decide to punish your opponent. This is near unprecedented in other fighting games. If you throw out a jab in Tekken, your opponent isn't going to move inwards and get obliterated because the attack sticks around for more than a second. It's either hit your opponent or whiff and get punished. And if you had to ask me in which instance active frames becomes truly frustrating in Brawlhalla, I would say it's in the string of attacks. Anyone who has played this game for any reasonable amount of time has probably asked themselves this question: why the fuck did this catch my dodge? And well, It's because most of the moves have so many active frames, to where you can start a combo and have your opponent dodge out of it, but still drag them back into it. And this feels so stupid, especially because of how common this is. And this problem is only worsened with the added fact that no matter how absurd a hit is, if you dare letting even a single pixel touch you, it'll smack you with the full force of the move. Brawlhalla is not scared of delivering a knuckle sandwich straight to your face, and this is painfully frustrating whenever you get hit by an attack that either overstates its welcome or doesn't feel accurately depicted. Oftentimes you'll think to yourself, how the hell did that hit just because a spark hit your woozy little ass? And people complain about it for a good reason. And while I can't say that there's a definitive fix to these problems, I would personally propose one solution that could ease the effects, that being that the edges of a hitbox should deal less damage. Now, at first glance this idea probably sounds like complete ass, but please hear me out first, because this change implies a lot more than meets the eye. But first of all, let's clarify the rule set of my suggestion. Firstly, the inner hitbox should always take priority over the outer hitbox. The outer layer is there in case people run into attacks that roam around for way too long. Secondly, this shouldn't apply to every attack in the game, because for one, not every attack has a bajillion active frames, and secondly, not every attack is as wide as the Great Wall of China. The reason I believe this could fix some of the issues regarding active frames is because for one, it would reward the player for properly hitting their attacks on release, and secondly, it would punish those who rely on their hitboxes catching dodges because of the excessive duration of active frames. Now, to note something, you could also make it in a way where a move deals less damage the later the player gets hit by it, because combos like Ada Spear, D-Light, Ensic would still be fully rewarded in this instance. This change would incentivize players to improve on their movement since it benefits those who excel at positioning. At the same time, it wouldn't alter any of Brawlhalla's core gameplay, so people shouldn't feel alienated by this change either. And while I can't entirely vouch for this suggestion either, it's the best idea I could come up with. And to make this clear, the damage when hitting with the outer hitbox should be decreased by a realistic amount. Hitting a move properly on release should be treated as a reward, not as a requirement. Before moving on, however, I want to bring up another idea that I've come across multiple times, and that is the suggestion that moves should deal less force. And while this sounds good on paper, it would cause quite a few problems. First of all, it would lead to some interactions feeling very weird and clunky. This is not to say that my suggestion is bulletproof either though, but I do think that it causes less issues than other proposals, while also not alienating the player base or causing any other severe issues. And I mean, hey, I think it's pretty cool since it would also encourage higher level play to some degree, or, well, movement for that matter. So, in conclusion, a lot of people claim that Brawlhalla's hitboxes are a part of its charm, which is a sentiment that I personally agree with. There's just a certain satisfaction in seeing something so absurd happen in a real match, and it's definitely not an experience that you'll get with most other fighting games. The problem, however, is that it alienates newer players and veterans alike. It's a type of feature that just infuriates any kind of player, and while you could argue that learning Brawlhalla's hitboxes is just a part of the learning process, a lot of the hitboxes just don't feel intuitive through visuals alone. As a player, you shouldn't be required to check a replay frame by frame just to figure out why something happened. Experiencing it in a match should already give you the information required to learn from it, but sometimes this quality just isn't present in Brawlhalla. In the end, poking fun at the complete absurdity of what can happen in Brawlhalla is one of its most enjoyable aspects, but the moment you become the victim of bad hitboxes, the game quickly loses all of its fun. It's really difficult to find a solution to a problem when it can fundamentally alter the game's dynamics, and exactly that's the problem present here with hitboxes. But do you know what? There's something even dumber than hitboxes. Introducing drop moves. A gameplay flaw that plagues Brawlhalla but usually goes under the radar for most people. For those who don't know what drop moves are, I'm referring to moves where your opponent just falls out of your attack in the middle of the attack's duration, which obviously sounds stupid, right? Now, one thing I should clarify beforehand is that this issue mostly applies to 2v2, but it still affects 1v1 often enough to where I consider it a severe issue with the game. And if you don't want to believe me on that, well, I've got you covered, bud. Yeah, this folder you're seeing here, I got all of these clips in 3 days. If even this isn't enough to prove you how often drop moves occur, then I don't know what will. Now, you could come to the conclusion that drop moves aren't as bad as I make them out to be. After all, your opponent simply falls out of your attack, right? I mean, you can just punch them straight after it, right? Well, exactly that is where you're wrong. Because you know what? Instead, you just get stuck in your move's animation, rendering the stun you apply to your enemy utterly useless. This means that the game is literally punishing the player for hitting an attack for no justified reason, and it's completely stupid. But before I rant on like a raving madman, let me explain all the instances that can cause moves to drop, starting with dragging moves. If an attack tries to keep you in a specific spot during its duration, then that move is considered a dragging move. An extension of the concept are multi-hit moves, Orion Spear Ensig or Sword Endlight for example. If either of these two apply, there's a chance for the attack to drop under specific conditions, like the stage blocking the move from dragging the player to the intended location, or because the player is badly positioned for the attack. Because it's way too fast. Oh no.
He just dies. I put a couple on the way. That deserved to happen to him.
Now, this probably doesn't sound that bad. After all, there are only 2 instances that can cause moves to drop. But exactly that's where you're wrong. You find yourself in these situations so often on a daily basis. I mean, think about it. The fact that positioning alone can already cause drops to happen is a massive issue. And getting conned out of a win like that is just comical, although the fact that it can happen at all is already ludicrous by itself. Now, don't get me wrong, this might be a personal belief I hold, but if you hit a move, it should always hit, even with the presence of external factors like a stage being there. Although the only way of implementing that in Brawlhalla would be if they made it so attacks continue hitting the player regardless of their positions or other possible obstructions. But do you know what? There's something oddly funny about that idea. It's already in the fucking game. Introducing grapple moves. Moves that in no way, shape, or form care about your feelings or where you're positioned. The moment their hitbox touches you, it'll automatically disregard anything and everything just to kill you. Now, I can't say that applying this rule to every dragging move in the game would feel cool and epic, because... But what I can say is that it would undoubtedly be the healthier alternative for a lot of moves, especially considering the fact that Brawlhalla is a competitive game. But dragging moves aren't the only moves capable of dropping your opponent. The same problem applies to teleporting moves. Attacks such as Volkov's Sidestick that like to cross the interdimensional plane tend to run into their own set of problems as well, that being that the character teleports to a set location. Now, initially this sounds like a totally reasonable thing to do, but the problem comes whenever there's an obstruction that misplaces the user, because that'll cause them to teleport the wrong way, which in turn makes them smack this lovely substance that we call air. I don't think I need to explain why this design decision is flawed, so I'll spare your time and give my thoughts. The only proposal I could come up with that could fix teleporting moves would be for them to teleport the player in relation to the opponent, or the opponent gets dragged to the intended position regardless of obstructions being in the way. And these changes would have to be applied to any move with similar physics. Following that, we have drops exclusive to 2v2. These are also known as grapple cancels. They occur when multiple attacks collide into the same player, which causes the moves to cancel each other out. Now, what's unique about this drop is that once it happens, all of the damage and force that was being applied to the opponent also gets cancelled out. That means they get out of both attacks almost entirely unscathed, which is just stupid. Yeah, I don't know how to describe it. But yeah, grapple cancels happen very rarely in Brawlhalla. But even in spite of their rarity, I frankly don't see a reason for them to exist, as there are more sensical alternatives to them. Like one move taking priority over the other, or for both the original and the new intervening move to deliver their intended damage. I just think that this would be preferable to witnessing a scenario where one, if not both, don't apply. Lastly, there's a very peculiar type of drop. So peculiar, in fact, that I don't even know why they happen. What? What was that? But from what I've been able to observe, these drops seem to occur due to weird interactions in the physics engine of this game. Since I don't have a PhD in Brawlhalla game physics though, I don't really know enough on the matter to give you a full explanation on them. But what I can assure you is that these drops are without a doubt the rarest drops in the game. Since I'm only capable of theorizing their cause, however, I will leave my hands off of them. I simply wanted to point attention to their existence in case anyone is interested enough to delve deeper into this topic. Drop moves are probably one of, if not the most frustrating things in Brawlhalla, talking from personal experience at least. You can explain almost every instance of why a move drops, but in a real game, you aren't really in control of whether a move drops or not, because you'd have to intentionally go out of your way to hit the moves in a way where they never drop. But that's an expectation that shouldn't exist to begin with. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that if you hit something in a game, then you should be rewarded for it. The outcome of a match shouldn't be affected by something that basically boils down to luck, especially when measures could be taken towards fixing that very problem. And the fact that they're so painfully common just exacerbates the issue. I mean, come on. I've been able to compile these clips in the span of 3 days, and my first ever round with Loki, this happened to me. Like, now, I want to make this clear again. I'm not saying that BMG should just go around and give any move there is the same property as grapple moves. And I think the reason as to why is self-explanatory. I wouldn't want every move to be able to do this. But I think it's justified to argue that a lot of moves in this game shouldn't drop, and some of them might even need this property. At the current moment, it just feels like some attacks get preferential treatment, while other moves are simply being neglected. But with that, I think I just about covered everything regarding drops, so let's move on to the next section. Clashes. In concept, they sound amazing, but their realization is pure and utter trash. Okay, but let's not get ahead of ourselves and actually discuss what clashes are and how they work before thrashing on the concept. So, clashes, to explain in layman's terms, when both opponents hit each other at the same time, a clash will occur, knocking both parties away and resetting neutral game, so neither player gets the advantage. Or well, that is what its intended purpose is, but sometimes you'll find yourself drawing the short end of the stick and having shit like this happen to you.
Wait, what?
Why the fuck did it throw me down? Now, there are a few reasons for why clashes are annoying to deal with. Firstly, being active frames. Yeah, it's like a reoccurring end boss of Brawlhalla, I swear to God. But yeah, for the sake of argument, let's say hypothetically hitboxes dissipate instantly, then clashes wouldn't happen nearly as often. It's just that they're super common as a byproduct of active frames. What's also kind of weird is the priority graph for Brawlhalla's clashes going from lowest priority to highest priority, which mind you, makes complete sense, but the weird thing I'm referring to is the fact that the system completely disregards a weapon's move. Something like hammer or axe might exude this heavy weapon energy, whilst katars feels more like a light weapon, yet axe and hammer can't take priority over katars. It will always end in a clash, and to me personally, this just feels wrong and out of place, because if you wield the heaviest weapon in the game, you aren't going to expect to clash with something that looks as heavy as a pair of scissors, which is not heavy. And now comes the most annoying part of clashes. So we've established that if both opponents hit each other at the same time, they'll clash no matter the circumstances. Makes sense, right? Well, that rule also indicates that clashes occur even if you attack someone from behind. Yeah, from fucking behind. Do I even have to justify what is so tremendously stupid about this? Well, moving on, let me ask you, yes, you, the viewer, a question. Why are all aerial moves considered the same priority? And yes, that includes ground pound and recovery, because like, okay, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I've always viewed ground pounds and recoveries as the aerial counterpart of grounded signatures, you know? And as such, they should take priority over the normal aerial kit, nair, sair, and dare, but at the moment, somebody could literally use unarmed nair, and if you're coming in from below with a recovery, you'll just get launched straight to the abyss because of a clash. And to me, that has always felt weird. I even asked a pro on this, and he agreed that recoveries and ground pounds are more reminiscent of heavy moves. But I think this is more of a subjective view, so in the end, it's up to you to form your opinion on this one. I just personally find it very weird that they're all considered the same priority. Now, to my proposal on how you could fix clashes. I'ma be honest, I don't think there's a way to fix clashes that would make everyone happy. They are in this weird position where they sound like a great addition to the game, but are flawed by default because of how Brawlhalla is designed. The only idea that came to mind for me would honestly be to take inspiration from Super Smash Bros.'s priority system, assuming you translate Super Smash Bros.'s mechanics over to Brawlhalla. Now you might ask, how does Smash Bros. Approach priority in their game? And well, they do it in the form of clanks and rebounds. Clanks, just like clashes, occur when two hitboxes collide into each other. The key difference being here, however, the clanks, instead of launching both opponents away, rather cause both moves to cancel each other out, resulting in no damage, hit stun, or knockback being done to either party. Rebound refers to the state the character enter after a clank occurs, which is when both players are frozen in place for a short period of time. While this happens, all hitboxes are disabled and no damage or hit stun is applied to either player. Aerials, on the other hand, work quite similarly to Brawlhalla, the only difference being that both moves hit at the same time instead of a clash occurring, meaning that both players will be launched in the direction the moves were meant to go originally, with both players capitalizing the full reward in their moves. Now, I've already said that Brawlhalla shouldn't copy Smash's example of a priority system. They should simply take inspiration from it. Sadly, a perfect priority system doesn't exist, but that doesn't disregard the fact that this system is much better suited for a fighting game like Brawlhalla. And don't forget, I'm here to argue what would work better for the game. Sometimes the best answer isn't the most original or creative idea. I just can't see how else Brawlhalla could salvage its current clashing and priority system because of how fundamentally flawed it is. The only way I could see out of this predicament would be for BMG to rework clashes from the ground up, which is literally what I'm proposing here. But you know what else you can pick from the ground up? Your weapon. Introducing weapon throws. I personally love weapon throws. It is one of, if not the most unique feature that actively changes how Brawlhalla can be played. But as much as I love to throw my personal belongings down the dump, I just cannot bring myself to say that they aren't an awfully problematic feature for Brawlhalla. But before I go into more detail about it, I'll first explain how they can be used in gameplay and how it can lead to problems. So without further ado, let's get into this. Weapon throws can be utilized to limit your opponent's options and disrupt their movement, while also having the ability to bait the opponent into risky situations that'll give you the advantage. And even in the case that you fail to hit your opponent, you'll likely end up in a favorable position if you know how to use them properly. But not only that, they can also offer vital recovery protection in the form of vertical throws. This for one allows you to ward off edge guards and in some cases even reverse an edge guard situation. Another way of employing throws comes in the form of gimping, as they're a safe option due to their near unlimited range, making them a superb option with almost no drawbacks. And even if your opponent goes around your weapon throw, it'll still reduce their options to safely recover from offstage, meaning that if you miss a throw, you'll still get rewarded for using it. What I do have to note though, is that weapon throw force was nerfed heavily a lot of years ago, so nowadays you could unironically save your opponent by throwing your weapon at them offstage, since getting hit gives them an extra jump. But you can make up for that by using techniques such as egg drops, in which you pick up your weapon and do an attack right after it, which is also a technique that ties into the next point, weapon throw combos, in which you throw your weapon at the opponent to start a combo. From personal experience, I can say that this is the least utilized technique that weapon throws have, as they're rather hard to pull off consistently, especially for beginners, and they even see fairly rare use in higher elos. Weapon throw combos can be used both offstage, although to a fairly limited degree, so you can basically only use egg drops down there, and on stage, where you have quite a lot of options and freedom as for what you can do. Wanna throw your weapon and just give them a smack? Go on. You want to hit them with the most cursed combo in human history? That's also on the list of possible options. But I think you get my point by now. And lastly, we have team combos. Here, weapon throws are used for team combo setups. Throws in this context are mostly used in order to extend a combo or to further glorify how cool they look. This is because most team combos can KO opponents long before weapon throws are actually necessary to extend a combo. Now, is this actually relevant to its problems? No, I just like talking about weapon throws and team combos. Now, as for the problems. At the crux of the issue is the fact that there's no way of deflecting throws. As they currently are, there's no drawbacks to using them, except for, well, losing your weapon. And I've already mentioned how throws can be used to attack, defend, and bait all at the same time, which is utterly ridiculous for a single mechanic. The only mechanic in the game that can counter a weapon throw is the weapon throw. And I might be stating the obvious here, but the only solution to a problem should never be to utilize the problem yourself. That's the same as fighting fire with fire. There should always be more options to countering throws, but as they are now, there's no way of doing that. Something else that I want to discuss that doesn't have to do with throws balancing is how unclear the rules are for when throws actually hit. To provide some context, in the past, throws instantly hit the player after being thrown. Makes sense, right? I mean, that's how you'd expect them to work. The thing is just, what that meant was that they trigger even when standing inside of your opponent, which made them way more broken than they should ever be. Because of this, Blue Mammoth Games decided to nerf weapon throws, which makes sense, but they did it by making it so weapon throws can only hit under one condition, that being, the throw has to be outside of a player's hurt box for at least one frame until it can register and hit the player, with the weapon's size obviously affecting the distance required for a throw to hit. Now, don't get me wrong, this seems like a reasonable change to counteract that problem. It's just, because of this change, this happens. That fucking throw just passes through me. That is so stupid, what the fuck. And people often ask themselves, wait, why did my throw just pass through my opponent? What the hell? Because most people aren't aware that this is how throws work on a frame basis. This in turn makes them often feel like they're inconsistent pieces of shit, where you just don't know when they'll pass through your opponent or not, and that just completely ruins the fun in using them. Oh, and since we're already on the topic, I'm gonna drop another fun fact. If your opponent isn't stunned, throws will instantly trigger on the opponent, which enables combos like this, which only adds to the confusion for some players, because in their minds you could go like, why does my throw pass through the opponents here, but I can make it hit here? It's weird. I don't know how else to put it. The last thing I want to bring up for this section is that each weapon has its own properties for force. Now, at first it sounds like I'm pointing out the obvious, but there's this common misconception that big weapons deal big force, while smaller weapons, understandably so, deal less force. The thing is, this actually isn't the case. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite, which quite frankly was something that my brain had to compute for a second. But yeah, now you might ask, wait, why is this the case? Because it is a really backwards way of doing things. And well, personally, the only thing I could theorize was that this was done for the sake of balancing. I mean, think about it. Since bigger weapons cover vastly more space than, well, small weapons, they need a downside to make up for it. Unless you just want bigger weapons to have objectively better throws in every avenue. But whether that assumption is correct or not, I can't say. For those who are curious though, I tried to chart out which weapons had the most force and which had the least with a friend of mine, and ultimately we came to the list, which again shows a common trend of big weapons like hammer, scythe and lance being on the lower side of the spectrum, while small weapons like blasters, gauntlets and katars thrive at the top. And while I'm at it, did you know that force stance also plays a role in how much knockback weapon throws deal? Yeah? Oh, okay. I guess I'm the only one who figured that out just now. So much for playing this game for 5 years. But either way, you shouldn't bother with the force of your characters, as it doesn't really matter whether you have a 10 force Zol or a 2 force lmfao for your weapon throws. The difference in knockback is so negligible that it won't have a meaningful impact on the outcome of the match. I just felt like dropping another fun fact. Throws are a ton of fun to use in my eyes, but they simply aren't suited for a competitive environment. They're inherently broken by design, and their versatility comes with minimal disadvantages, making them an absolute pain to deal with. In the past, there have been multiple attempts at fixing weapon throws in the form of dash reflect and throw clashes, but neither of those ideas addressed the fundamental issues throws had, or were simply impractical for most players to use on a normal basis, which is why they were scrapped. The problem is just, there simply doesn't seem to be a good idea that could fix weapon throws from the ground up, because the root cause of its unfair properties is something that lies within the concept and design of the mechanic itself. Heck, even I don't have any ideas on how you could fix weapon throws, despite being a hardened war criminal who has actively abused them for years. So as much as I like weapon throws, as they are now, they simply cause a negative impact on the overall gameplay. Now, don't get me wrong, the idea itself is fantastic. I mean, I wouldn't rant on about how much I love them otherwise. Weapon throws are fun to use, it's just that their execution falls short in several ways. If their implementation was somehow done right, I'm certain that people would love throws instead of resenting them. But it's really difficult for me to imagine that weapon throws could ever be changed in a way where they wouldn't be broken in a competitive environment. But do you know what breaks a competitive environment even more? Crossovers. Crossovers. They're a great addition to this game. They give Brawlhalla more publicity by introducing faces that are already popular outside of the community, making heaps of new people try out the game. But as good as they are for this game's health, they also bring along a competitive advantage that is affecting the game negatively. Before we get into any of that though, let's first talk about history. You know, Brawlhalla's history. Whatever. The story begins with Dan Fornes, the creator of Rival to Fiverr, challenging Brawlhalla, the Twitter account, to a bet to see who can reach 20,000 Twitter followers first. The terms of the bet being that whoever lost would have to create a skin for their game using a character from the opposing game as inspiration. In the end, Brawlhalla won the bet by quite a significant margin, but despite having the privilege of the winner, Blue Mammoth Games decided to add a crossover skin regardless, giving birth to the Rana Wu Shang skin. Fast forward 9 months from now and we see the arrival of the Shovel Knight crossover, which was a crossover done in partnership with Yacht Club Games, introducing Shovel Knight, Black Knight, King Knight, Plague Knight, and Spectre Knight as the first real crossovers in Brawlhalla, with Enchantress making her debut 3 months later. In between the time frame, we also got patch 3.32, Rayman is coming, with Rayman as the first playable crossover legend in Brawlhalla, featuring his own unique moveset, and accompanying him we have his partners Barbara and Glowbox. This crossover was to commemorate Ubisoft acquiring Blue Mammoth Games, and it was after the addition of Rayman that Brawlhalla really started to crank out more and more crossover skins, with many new franchises making their way into the game. Now, this was mostly in part because Ubisoft now held the rights over BMG, and I mean, they have a lot of IPs to flex, so obviously they put a lot of them into Brawlhalla. But now comes the question, what problems do crossovers even have? I mean, do they just look weird or what? And to that I say, yeah, they kinda do. But that's besides the point. The real issue that crossovers have are their custom signatures. Now, what do I mean custom signatures? Well, you see, for every crossover that gets added to Brawlhalla, the developers create newly animated signatures. This is so the crossover skins blend in with the rest of the cast, as it might feel weird to see a turtle spitting fire or Jake suddenly turning into a rock. The problem with that, however, is the fact that some of the custom signatures are just plain unfair in comparison to their original counterpart. This is because they, for one, have a different visual design, as well as a different sound design, both of which are details that are extremely important in a fighting game. So that begs the question, what could be done to remedy the pay-to-win aspects of crossovers? And well, a suggestion that is often thrown around by people is just to let us disable crossovers, which is a notion that I personally disagree with. I mean, don't forget, crossovers are an advertisement. Giving people the option to turn crossovers off is like telling YouTube to make app lock an integrated feature that isn't paid. As a player, you're supposed to see the crossover, so adding the option to disable crossovers entirely isn't something that we can go with here. But if you think about it for just a little bit, the answer becomes quite simple. Why? Because crossovers themselves aren't the core issue here. The problem lies within the custom signatures themselves. So the proposal that I have come up with is, why not let people turn off the custom signatures? A great example of this argument would be the first crossover Rano. He has no custom signatures to boot, yet he's still a crossover, and he most definitely looks the part. Now, don't misunderstand me. If you told me this frog looked like Wu Shang, I would call you crazy. Yet despite his looks, he doesn't feel unfair to fight in the slightest. It's just that his signatures are the same as the originals, and that's everything the player needs to know to see what he's up against. I know that the custom signatures were made to go along with the crossover, and yes, it will look weird to see a Daryl suddenly ride a wolf instead of his bike, but the fact that the animations and sounds are so vastly different from the original doesn't justify them in a competitive environment. And to get this straight, not all of the custom signatures are unfair. It's just that some of the bad actors coerce people into buying crossovers purely for the sake of getting a competitive advantage. And while this might sound like a stretch, I haven't seen a single cross player in Ranked without this skin in the past month. And I wish I'd be exaggerating. And while sure enough, you could argue that Luke just looks objectively better than all of the other cross skins, I just personally don't believe that to be the case. Adding on to that, I don't want to disregard the design team's work on these signatures either. I respect the effort they've put into them, and I completely understand if they want people to see their work regardless of the competitive spirit. So I want to add another suggestion alongside the already mentioned, why not let people turn off custom signatures? And that is to make this a ranked only setting, just like the ability ability to turn gadgets off and enable the tournament map set. This would both defend the competitive experience of ranked and tournaments while still showing the hard work that was put into these signatures in casual play, which should ultimately be the best of both worlds. Now, to conclude, crossovers have a generally positive impact on Brawlhalla by giving the game more publicity and making new people try it out. It's just that with the integration of custom signatures, they have kind of warped Brawlhalla from a free-to-play game into a game that actually has a paid feature, namely being crossovers, which honestly saddens me because for a long time I appreciated the fact that Brawlhalla was an entirely free game that didn't disadvantage anyone. It's just, this is the first time that I genuinely felt like a feature was locked behind a paywall that actually gave you a proper advantage. And because of that, I really hope that Blue Mammoth Games could do something about this to preserve Brawlhalla's integrity as a free-to-play fighting game. But that should about wrap up my points on crossovers. Or not, because BMG decided to add a lot of things that drastically worsened this whole section, introducing mythic crossovers and ascended skins. So, starting from patch 8.06, the Brawlhalla Star Wars event, BMG has started to create mythic skins. What differentiates these from the normal epic crossovers, yes, that's what these are actually called, these new crossovers, while still retaining the same caveat of custom signatures in their kit, they also now have a weapon that has unique moves to boot. And while I find that annoying, that in of itself would be fine. But what makes this such a massive problem to me is the fact that everyone can use these weapons. These laser swords, for example, aren't restricted to just the Star Wars characters. Like, it's totally reasonable for Darth Vader to hold a laser sword because it's in character for him, but when you hand that thing over to a pirate like Thatch or random Bearman Bodvar on the streets over there, that automatically throws the argument of it's supposed to fit to the character completely out of the window. If anything, this is probably the most blatant example of actual pay-to-win in Brawlhalla, because these crossover weapons are way more versatile in where and how often you can use them, since you're not limited to a single character anymore, which is even more apparent when you consider the fact that you can buy these weapon skins separately from the original crossover skin. And there's no way you can argue that these sound effects aren't harder to hear than the original weapons.
Even the weapon pickup noise, fucking. Look. It makes it twice on moves that hit twice. Oh my. Sidelight does the move twice. I'm just gonna make a Brawlhalla mod, overwrite every sound with and see how they like it.
But now that some more time has passed, we have gotten even more of these mythic crossovers that have the exact same issues, where every character can use their weapons along with their special animations. Like, take Mega Man's Mega Buster for example. It should not be used on Cassidy. You're crazy if you think this looks proper, and the animations don't fit her either. Also, the fact that a mythic crossover like the Mandalorian costs even more than the average crossover because he has a companion with him that runs around the stage that can distract your opponent is also just blatant pay-to-win marketing. Like, what the hell? And now in the most recent times, they've also created an ascended skin of Nyx and Wushang, which both respectively cost over $30. Or 900 mammoth coins in Brawlhalla terms. What are these rip-off prices? And while they do look cool, I'll give them that, unironically, they still retain all the same problems as the mythic crossovers, while also adding a unique dash trail to the kit. Why? I don't know. Now, I won't be saying this is necessarily pay to win, but it can throw people off when 2 of the 60 plus characters suddenly have a different dash trail, and the prices to justify something like this are ludicrous. Now, to be fair, there are like extra cosmetics to justify that price, but it's the only way to get that skin, so people can't get around it. Now, if I had to give my personal opinion on these, it's honestly just that I'm baffled that Blue Mammoth Games decided that this was fine to add, because this is crossing way more of a line than any other crossover. But with all of that said, I think it's time to move on to the next major section, subjective issues. Or so I thought until I saw this video. Power creep, a term that most of you will probably be very familiar with. To explain power creep in simple terms, it is when new content or features are added to the game that make older ones obsolete or irrelevant, in this case creating an imbalance between older and newer characters. Or in Brawlhalla terms, new legends are goddamn fucking broken.
He can just fucking do it. Yep, tough to say girly as fuck. He kills. No, this character's fucking dog shit.
Now, is power creep present in Brawlhalla? Yes, absolutely. I have not the slightest doubt that power creep is very much present within Brawlhalla's newest characters. You could even say that this has been the case for a very long time now. It has just become especially apparent with the more recent additions like 7 on release or Amugi. But before we can really tackle the problem of power creep, we should first ask the question, in what forms does power creep even happen in Brawlhalla? Here I would put forth 3 ways in how new characters might get power crept. Number 1. A ridiculous stat spread with a mismatching character archetype. For example, insanely high force but with fast attacks like 7 or Mugi, or an insanely fast character but with high force like Fia at release. Second, quirks and moves that weren't present in any prior character. For example, the jump in Fia's Lance Ensic hitting, Arcadia's attack having enough active frames to the point where she can attack before her move even ends, or something like moves being affected by gravity when slide charging them. And most importantly, third, and what I would like to mainly discuss here, more complex movesets ranging from moves with active input all the way to attacks with alternate versions like wall signatures. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, are any of these things truly unique to only the newer characters? No, not really, but they are becoming much more common with the newer characters. Usually these features were used very sparsely, but now they're appearing with almost every single character. But here I have to pose yet another question. If power creep is present in Brawlhalla, is it really as bad as people make it out to be? Yes, but also no. If I had to make a genuine case for it, it is most definitely a problem, but the fact that all of Brawlhalla's characters share so many similarities automatically balances out a lot of the problems that come with power creep. Think about it like this, no matter how insanely overtuned you make a character's move, that doesn't change the fact that all characters still share the same fall speed, jump height, dodge time, even the same dodge cooldown and the same dodge distance. Heck, they all even have unarmed. The only thing that makes every character distinctly different from each other is their stat spread, what weapon combination they have, and what their signatures do, which kind of makes arguing power creep easier, but also more difficult, since in essence we basically have less points to analyze about power creep now. But we can take a much deeper look at the points that do create Brawlhalla's power creep. So let me start out with the first mechanic that I want to discuss. Moves that you can control while they're being charged. The first instance of this appearing in a character was Rayman with both of his D6. These two moves, along with Meiko Katar and the Mugi Greatsword D6, are moves that you can control in both directions with a ton of mobility. Now, the reason why I consider this a power creep feature is because being able to dictate where your attack moves does a lot for Brawlhalla's gameplay, especially at high level. Take for example Rayman's D6. Here you could charge both of them, fly off stage with them, and then fly back to safety, which is something that no other move can do. Now, there are other moves that give you the ability to control their movement in a single direction, but seeing as these moves that exhibit a ton of mobility and freedom in both directions only exist after Rayman's release, I would say that it's fair to consider this a product of power creep. Next up is moves with gravity. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, basically, it's moves that you can slide charge, and as you slide off the stage, your attack retains a hitbox. Now, I want to preface 2 things here. Firstly, these attacks come in 3 forms. The first is where you have to hit the opponent with the attack, and as the attack goes through its animation, you will keep on falling. In this instance, Course Gauntlet Ensic would be the only example. The second one comes in the form of moves that have a hitbox during their full duration, so as you slide off the stage, your move can hit at all times with no timing involved. This applies to Wushan Gauntlet D-Sig, 7 Spear Ensic, and Vivi Battle Boots D-Sig. And lastly we have third, moves that you can slide charge and after releasing the attack they will retain their gravity as well, with Mugi Greatsword D-Sig being the only example here. This means that you can actually drop really deep down with this move and then rely on the gravity of the move to cover a bigger area. Now let me go through these 3 examples one by one. Firstly, Core Gauntlets Ensig. Here I would personally argue that gravity buffs this move in 1v1, but could probably be considered a nerf in 2v2. The reason for that is, if you hit the attack, you'll lose so much height during the move's animation that it puts you way deep into the off stage, which more often than not puts you into a risky position 2v2, since their teammates could gimp you for it. This, however, doesn't apply to the second example, because all three, Wushang, 7 and Vivi6, have this quirk where if they hit their attack, they make a complete stop, preventing them from dropping to their deaths. Lastly, we have Amugi Greatsword Disik. Now, this is probably the worst offender of this gimmick, because Amugi has 3 things going for him. Number 1, you can control when you want to release the move. Number 2, if Amugi hits the move, he doesn't continue dropping down, so he doesn't even have the risk of dying from falling too deep during the attack's animation. And even if he misses, there is still a small stop in his falling animation, which gives the move a leniency factor that something like Core and 7 don't have. And lastly, you can fucking control the move, which in my opinion is a pretty broken combination of mechanics for a single move. Now, for anyone who has actually played the game recently and has paid enough attention to all of the characters I mentioned in this section, you might have picked up on the fact that, surprise surprise, the past 3 characters have all been examples of this type of power creep, with Amugi having an arguably better version than the original 2, which once again puts us up with the options. Do we excuse this as non-power creep since it existed before, or is this power creep because it's occurring much more commonly now with all of the newer characters? Well, I feel like it's fairly debatable what opinion you should have on this one, so I'm gonna leave the choice up to you, the viewer, this time around. Next up though, we have something pretty exciting, that being more complex movesets, starting with alternate versions. Now, what do I mean by alternate versions of a move? Well, to put simply, some moves in Brawlhalla have a different variation if you use them under one of 2 conditions. Either you use the move against a wall, or you use them in the air. In this video, however, I will refer to the air version as the offstage variation. Now, the alternate versions here all kind of have their own gimmicks and uses, spanning from them just being gimp tools like the first ever alternate version of a signature, Orion Spear Ensig, where if you do it in the air, the move will hit lower than usual and spike the opponent downwards. Travel signatures like Vector's and Scarlet's Lance N6, or something like the first ever instance of a wall move, Val Sword Sightsig, in which Val would climb up the wall and hit the opponent during its duration. What I'd also like to note with this move in specific is that it also has an offstage variation, which means that this was also the first attack in Brawlhalla to have 3 different variations. Other reasons for these variations to appear, for example, are moves that wouldn't necessarily work on the wall, so they have a special version to make up for that problem. Here, moves like Volkov Scythe Disik or Arcadia Spear Disik would work. Now, do they do this for every move that doesn't really work on the wall? Surprisingly, or well, unsurprisingly, no, not really. Take for example Caspian Qatar Sightsig. That attack just passes through the wall. Now, is this unfair? You could argue maybe yeah, but I would rather chalk this up to an artistic decision rather than for balancing's sake. And to be completely frank here, most of the moves on this list don't even really get impacted by their alternate versions. For some of them, it's an absolute godsend, whilst for others, it's just a small neat detail to polish up the move. So that begs the question, is this really a product of power creep? Honestly, no, but that's more because you can attribute these changes to characters across all time periods of the game, meaning that it's been a staple of this game since basically its inception. But I would argue that it's a mechanic that could potentially be power crept, but that's for us to see in the future. Besides that, we also have complexity in moves due to active input. Now, active input isn't a concept that I've yet explained in this video, so here's a TLDR. Basically, when you hit a move that has active input, you will be given the option to either do nothing and let the move go on as normal, or you do something specific like pressing forward for the move to change and do something new. This, for example, is what the majority of Scythe's kit is built around, because every single move on it has active input, with the exception of Endlight, Ground Pound, and Recovery. Now, is active input on signatures really a problem? I would argue not really, except for some cases. The thing is, there are almost no signatures with active input, and the characters that do have it are pretty spread around with their release times, so in that front, they're honestly fairly balanced. But there are some very specific signatures where I would argue that their active input just makes them a lot better than they have to be. For example, Vivi's Battle Boots D6 feels like a straight up power creep version of Val's Sword D6. Not only does it have a constant hitbox while falling down, but the active input also gives you the choice to launch them forwards or backwards. But to contrast that, there just aren't many moves like this where active input really makes much of a difference in how good they are. It is instead the active input on Scythe, Greatsword, and probably Battle Boots that pose more of an issue here. But as much as I'd like to yap on about them in this section, I will discuss them later in the video. Although not so much for their balance, but more so for how well implemented their active input is in the gameplay. Personally though, I think there's a lot of people who would say that the two newest weapons, Greatsword and Battle Boots, are broken due to their weird and quirky nature, and these can mostly be attributed to the fact that they have so much active input compared to all of the other weapons, with the exception of Scythe. Lastly, I want to discuss unique moves. They're not unique, but I'll call them that. These are moves that are basically exclusive to their character and don't really appear in any other character. Let me explain. Something like your average sidekick will usually just be an attack that hits in front of you, but no matter how different the animations are, if they kick you, slap you, or I don't know, beat your ass with a sword, fundamentally they all share the fact that they'll hit in front of the player. But something like Yumiko's D6 would be a unique move at the time of its release, and the only time a move like that was added again were Arcadia's D6, and she was released almost 5 years after Yumiko. Another example of a unique move, however, would be something like Meiko Greatsword Sidekick, which lets you hold the signature to drag your opponent further without a drawback. Something like Dusk Orb Sidekick or Wushan Gauntlet D6, on the other hand, have the drawback that your opponent can drop out of the attack if you charge it for too long. Besides that, there are also moves like Red Raptor Orb Sidekick, in which you move a great distance, but you hop out of it at the end, in turn making it a much safer move than before. Outside of that, there's also moves that change when you charge them. For example, Petra's Orb Sidekick getting a longer range and her D6 gaining a larger hitbox, as well as something like Arcadia's Greatsword Sidekick turning into a projectile instead of a slash. What I would argue is the most unique signature of the game, however, is 7 Spear D6. That is because the move lets you change the weapon's entire kit from an electro-based weapon with fast moves and low force to a slower, more heavy-hitting fire version with bigger hitboxes. Now, is this a cool feature? Yes, absolutely. Is it a unique gimmick for that character that makes him stand out? 100%, yes. Would I argue it is a fair feature? Absolutely 100% no. I don't think I have to go into detail why giving a character a weapon with 2 full kits could be considered unfair, so instead I will jump to the truly important points of this discussion and what I've been building up to this whole time. Balance and simplicity and complexity. Now, the reasons I went into detail explaining all of the prior points so much is because on their own, they aren't problems, but it's when you combine multiple of these points in a single move or character that power creep comes into play. Take for example the newest legend of Mugi and his Greatsword D6. In the moves with gravity section, I've mentioned how much more advantageous this move is compared to all of the other moves, but even despite all of these advantages, it is also an attack that you can move back and forth, meaning that on the movement control scale, it is on the broken side as well. Combine that with the fact that it has enough active frames to catch dodges, and you've officially created what I would consider to be the possibly most overtuned version of a gravity affected move ever. Then there is active input. Here I would say that something like Vivi's Battle Boots D6 has an extremely useful active input, which elevates the move from being pretty good to being really fucking good. You can basically treat it as a Powercreep version of Val's Sword D6, which I mentioned earlier. Not only does it hit higher, has a much bigger hitbox, but it also has gravity on its side. On miss, there's a short pause on your falling animation so you don't drop to your death like Core in 7 again, and compared to Val's Sword D6, the signature launches horizontally, turning it into much more of a kill move. Now add to that the active input, which gives you the choice to throw the enemy forwards or backwards, and you have an insanely good combination of things in an attack. Now you could argue, it's a signature that hits in both directions anyway, so isn't it fine that it can launch in both directions? And I mean, yeah, but also, it's just an unnecessary buff if you consider how good the move already is. The thing is, if you apply the same problem to something like Teska Gauntlet Sidekick or Battle Boots D6, which both have the ability to launch backwards or forwards, there isn't really much of a justification for it. I mean, I guess you could say that bro's just good at manhandling people since wrestling was his main profession in the lore, but like, At that point, you could argue completely random stuff like Petra's Gauntlet D6 should have an upwards active input where she finishes you with an uppercut, since that should canonically be well within her abilities. What canonically shouldn't be possible, however, is the problem with the mismatching character archetypes, and this is the most obvious with someone like a Mugi who, let me paraphrase from Xtube's video, is the slowest.
The actual best example of a brutish tank that we have in the game, especially because of his high strength. And again, he's literally a turtle. And yet, you have these SIGs that come out at fierce
speed. And do I have to agree with this? Absolutely! Not only are Mugi's stats completely ridiculous, but his signatures are also completely overtuned with way too massive hitboxes, way too much movement, and way too much force and speed. Now, in the video, Xtube also says that it's a ton of fun playing a Mugi, and do I agree with this? Absolutely 100% yes. If I had to argue a Mugi's balance objectively, I would want to throw him straight into the trash can and never see him again. I'm gonna be frank, he simply isn't fair as a character in almost every way, but if you ask me from a design perspective how impressive Mugi is, I would honestly have to say that Mugi is an amazing character. All of these concepts that I've mentioned before have truly come to fruition in this character, but as the name of the category says, you have to balance complexity with simplicity. If we ignore Mugi's and Seven's completely unfitting stats for the kit, I would say that Vivi, Seven, and Mugi are by far the most well-polished characters mechanically. They have so many things that make them more unique than the rest of the cast. It's just that now, every single older character who doesn't have these unique abilities is kind of left in the dust. And in all honesty, I can't really imagine that you could buff someone like Cross to be as strong as a Mugi from a mechanical standpoint, because there are too many fundamental differences in how their moves are designed. Now, how could you approach fixing these issues? Well, first of all, just don't design a straight up completely 100% ridiculously overtuned character like a Mugi. But besides that, you can take two approaches to this problem. The first one could probably be seen in a character like Nash. He is one of the most simple characters in the game, yet his strength comes from the fact that his extremely simple moves are just insanely strong. So in this approach, you could balance it out by making mechanically complex characters like Seven, characters with setup moves like Arcadia and Yumiko, or something like active input with Teska, just weaker so their unique mechanics shine through as their strengths, while the sheer power and force of older legends is their strong suit. The second way to balance this out, however, and the probably more exciting one, would be to raise the mechanical ceiling of all characters, giving them all new moves and options. Now, funnily enough, this is what BMG is kind of going with. They're slowly going over some characters, testing out changes that they could implement like the Cassidy D-Sig or Sentinel Hammer Seisig changes, which are great, but as much as I'd love to see this approach done, now that they are more experienced with developing Brawlhalla, I still have to point out one problem with this approach. These changes are coming too slowly. I mean, think about it. These new characters are being released about once every 3 months, and the past 3 releases have all had ridiculous characters. Add to that the fact that BMG has to be insanely careful when changing older characters so they don't ruin them, and you will be probably looking at a multiple year-long process until the majority of the cast can actually compete with these new mechanics and reworks. As of now, I would argue that this approach is more of a double-edged sword, but in the long term, it's probably better for the game. I don't want to say that they shouldn't do this, but instead I would at least recommend Blue Mammoth games that they should refrain from making something more ridiculous than a Mugi and rather spend their time upping the ceiling of all of the other characters until the game is truly prepared for these changes. Because if these new characters are the only ones with these abilities, then that'll be unfair. That is broken, and none of us want to get beaten up by that. But anyways, before I end the section off, I also want to clarify something some people might say. Oh, but what if you balance it by giving someone like a Mugi insane nerfs? To which I say, yeah? It's just, I personally don't really see Brawlhalla's power creep problem being every character is too strong at release, but I instead see the problem as the fact that these newer characters, mainly speaking, Seven and Mugi, being fundamentally different from all of the other characters. For one, because their stat spreads don't fit them, and stat spreads don't get changed retroactively in this game. And also something like Seven's Spear having 2 signature kits. When you reach a point like this, that isn't something you're able to properly balance anymore. Sure, you could add absolutely grounded weapon, but that isn't a matter of, wow, weapon is big and strong, but it is a fundamentally different thing. You're not balancing something by changing numbers here anymore, so please don't do something that treads even further than the already existing mechanics. Thanks. And with that, I'm personally finished with my overly long, 5-page rant. Jesus Christ, that was long. But anyways, moving on, we have subjective issues. Next up, I'll bring up issues that I consider to be bad for the game, but aren't severe enough for me to consider a quote-unquote objective problems in Brawlhalla's gameplay loop. So please take all of the following statements with a grain of salt, as they are my own opinions, just like the rest of the video. Anyways, since most of these points are lacking in severity, I would say it's time to cover the majority of them in a lightning round. First, moves with properties are most likely unintended because we love blowing the ground up just to deal absolutely no damage. Second, attacks are thrown directions that just don't make sense. Like, why does gauntlets and like throw up? So they're harder to use in team combos? Oh wait, what? Actually? Third, hitboxes and moves that were updated to be smaller but weren't updated visually, because I love burning my opponents alive just to realize that Brawlhalla legends are impervious to fire apparently. Fourth, attacks getting displayed but not actually being there. Oh, my condolences. And lastly, fifth, exhausted recoveries launching you straight into the abyss. But on the topic of climbing back up, let's discuss wall slip. Wall slip was originally invented to stop the player from camping on the walls of a stage, and to give credit where credit is due, it has achieved that goal to a pretty successful degree. It genuinely has made camping off stage a much harder task than before. But the issue I want to bring up with wall slip is that it triggers quickly enough to where it can kill people even when the intended reason isn't present, aka somebody camping on the wall. Something I have to make clear though is that I'm complaining from the perspective of a 2v2 player in this section. In my opinion, wall slip is totally fine as is for 1v1, but Blue Mammoth Games needs to keep both game modes in mind while balancing the game. I can't tell you how annoying it is when both of your opponents reverse camp the ledge of the stage, and I know a 2v1 is supposed to put you at a disadvantage, but it shouldn't disadvantage you more than it already does, and wall slip only makes it worse by attaching a metaphorical time bomb onto you. Anyways, back to the actual topic at hand. I have seen so many people fall to their deaths due to accidentally triggering wall slip, and to be completely frank, I find wall slip triggering at 9 jumps to be a tad bit too harsh, and whilst yes, you can usually surmise it's a skill issue. Should have just paid more attention, bro. Because all you need to do is hit your opponent or go back on stage to reset wall slip. I still feel like it'd be better to have wall slip trigger at 11 jumps instead of 9. This isn't because it causes issues for me, because I'm gonna be frank, wall slip is the least of my worries while playing, but it's for 2 different reasons. The first aforementioned, it sucks for 2v2, won't elaborate further on that though. And secondly, because it actively punishes aggressive play. You should.
I don't think I got one. But...
The thing is, you only get a jump if you completely ran out of jumps. Oh my god, no! If you don't understand, think about it like this. If you go down to chase your opponent, you will literally trigger wall slip by the time you get back up. Now, you could argue that camping on stage would be the more optimal course of action here, so you have no reason to go down there. But not everyone wants to be a reverse camper that just waits on stage, you know? People exist that want to chase their enemies down to hell and beyond, even if it causes their own demise. And why, you might ask? Because it's more fun that way. I can personally attest to the fact that it enabled more freedom for the attacker. Something else I want to note though is that back when 15 jump wall slip existed, you would progressively trigger wall slip faster the more often you had it. This basically peaked with wall slip triggering at 4 jumps. Now, this is just my own take, but I'd rather have 11 jumps off stage, but with the added rule that if you trigger all 3 exclamation marks twice in the same stock, or anything else that could potentially be surmised as camping behavior, wall slip immediately cracks down on the player just like it used to, with the effect sticking around until you get killed. Now, I don't believe that this is the best suggestion I could give, but I at least want to send the message that wall slip feels somewhat limiting as it is right now. I just wish that playing off stage wasn't as punishing as it is. But that about wraps up the conversation on wall slip. Next up, we have projectiles to discuss. Now you probably won't get what I mean by this terminology, so let me explain from the beginning. So in Brawlhalla there are a few moves that don't allow you to chase dodge after doing them, and as someone who has played the game for a long time, I'd always thought that it had to do with the abundance of recovery frames those moves had. At least that could have explained attacks like Yumiko's D6 or Fia's N6, but at the same time I knew there must be a fatal flaw in that way of thinking, because moves like Caspian and Fate N6 existed, so I dug a bit deeper than that. And by digging I mean Little Stork literally told me because he randomly knew about it for some godforsaken reason. And what he told me was the reason why some moves don't give you a chase dodge is because they're considered projectiles, which in hindsight does make sense and it should have been obvious to me, yet for some reason I never came to the conclusion. So I decided to look into it again to find out why I never came to that conclusion, and it was then that I had come to a realization. The property of being a projectile isn't distributed across moves fairly. Looking at Stork's explanation, we can deduce that the key distinction between a normal move and a projectile is whether the hitbox is attached to the hurtbox of the character or not. But when you look at all of the moves that are considered projectiles, you'll eventually come to the conclusion that some attacks are attached to the hurtbox, yet are still considered projectiles. Attacks like Orb N6 on 4, yes actually, or Vector D6 have seemingly no reason to be considered projectiles when compared to moves like Cassidy's or Reno's blaster signatures. You could even make a case with a side-by-side comparison of Fate's Scythe N6 and Dusk's Spear D6, where Dusk's attack isn't considered a projectile, yet Fate's is, despite them both serving the exact same purpose visually. Heck, you could even argue that Blaster's attacks should all be considered projectiles, which obviously shouldn't be the case, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. I just don't see the key distinction that's consistently present throughout all of these moves, and often enough it doesn't feel clear to the player why exactly some of these moves don't let you chase dodge. I mean, explain to me why a move like 4 N6, which obviously isn't a projectile, is considered a projectile. This move alone confirms the most likely hypothesis of projectiles being the reason as entirely obsolete. So the only thing that I can propose for BMG is to actually look through all of these attacks again and actually sort out which moves fit the description and which don't, while also filtering the attacks out that obviously don't belong into this category of moves. But moving on, we have reversing signatures that can unintentionally fuck you up. Yes, that's the actual title of the next section, and I'm not changing it. So, to explain in simpler terms, some of Brawlhalla's older signatures have the ability to X-pivot, but in a peculiar way. Basically, if you try to reverse a signature really quickly, it'll do whatever this here is. Now you could call this an intended feature, but I'm skeptical of that for a few reasons. So before I made this video I did some research, and by research I mean I went for every single godforsaken character, double checked every single signature they had just to see which ones had this and which ones didn't. And from my findings I concluded that not a single character after Yumiko possesses this weird feature. Now it might be a bit presumptuous of me to assume this, but if there's a feature that only some characters have, then I feel it is at least a bit justified to say this is probably more of a bug than it is an intended feature, you know? The characters that are stuck between Thatch and Yumiko are affected the most by this, which is probably because they aren't super old, like, I don't know, the first few Legends, but not new enough either for the developers to take a look at them to fix something so minor from them. They're simply stuck in this kind of limbo where they don't get enough attention to have the small issue removed from them. Now, since I'm saying that this is only a slight issue, why am I complaining about it? Well, it's because it makes some of the characters' moves harder to utilize for no clear reason. Even in Diamond, you can see players sometimes messing up reverse slide charges. For example, something like reverse Wushan Gauntlet Sightseek. And while you could argue that this mechanic could be utilized by a player, I could only see it being used properly by a tournament player. And even that feels like a stretch to me. I feel like the amount of skill required to employ this weird X-pivot properly is just too niche, and it only causes issues for those who aren't good enough to adjust their timing to not get fucked over by it. And before anyone misunderstands me, I'm not asking for grounded X-pivots to be removed as a whole. There's a reason why I worded it as X-pivot but peculiar. It's not the same X-pivot as per se Bow Endlight or Blaster Snare. Both of these X-pivots don't share the same properties as these X-pivots, and as such they should not be treated as the same thing either. But anyways, with that we have fully covered all of the things I personally wanted to vent about. But before we can move on to development issues, which is probably the most misleading name I've ever put into the script, I first have to tell you a story about something that happened 3.5 years ago. 2020, a year that broke countless metrics in Brawlhalla, be that in popularity, tournament prize pools, and heck, even public recognition. Needless to say, it was by far the most influential year that had ever swept up Brawlhalla. The momentum the game had built up was unparalleled, and with the chance presenting itself, Blue Mammoth Games decided the opportune moment had arrived for a special occasion: the addition of a new weapon for the first time in almost 2 years. Here I shall tell you a story from the perspective of my friends and myself, and how we perceived the things that happened after the release of Greatsword. It was in the middle of Brawlhalla's peak. Business was booming, the player base was thriving, and the World Championship BCX was soon to come. But before that faded tournament hit the scene, a massive update was dropped onto the game on July 8th, 2020. Patch 403, new legend and weapon, Jaeon with his Greatsword. Nobody had been expecting the release of a new weapon, especially considering how close BCX was to hitting the scene, and just like every new weapon, people needed time to adjust to it. But unlike its peers, Greatsword was different. To spice the weapon up and get people excited to try it out, the developers gave it a new gimmick, the face of which Brawlhalla had never seen before. But as someone who hasn't actually played the weapon that much myself, I think it's time to have a small detour and actually discuss what this weapon's special gimmick is. Explained in a short lesson by yours truly, Science-san. Here, come in.
Fucking damn yeah. Well, anyway, if you want to know about the Greatsword, I'll tell you about it. So, Greatsword introduces a unique playstyle which is based on stances to the game. After using a grounded light attack, you enter a stance, which is more commonly known in the community as a bridge, in which you can choose to either perform a bridge light attack, to dash, to dodge, or to jump. The bridge light attack can be followed up by a finisher light attack, which is basically just the stronger move that actually has force, can kill, and toss enemies off stage. Pretty simple stuff. Bridge light attacks, however, depend on the previous move used. And the same goes for the finisher. So if you use a side light, and then you use side light again, you're gonna skip the bridge light attack and go straight for the finisher. However, if you do side light and light, the end light is going to be a bridge light attack, and then you can choose to do another end light finisher, a side light finisher, or a down light finisher. But here's the thing. There's a reason why I didn't want to make this recording. This fucking weapon, just don't master it. Don't even attempt to do so. This weapon is not a Brawlhalla weapon, okay? It's just not. It has too many quirks. It's inconsistent as shit. It plays like a fucking Smash Bros character, yet the enemy has such a little window to punish you. No sane person should be touching this weapon. This weapon is sanity draining. The fucking frustration, the fucking L's, and the few W's I've had with this weapon ever since 2020 happened. Holy fucking shit, I want to have this weapon gone so bad. Just please, 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 heed my warning and don't fucking play it, okay? Spare yourself and spare your sanity. Spare everyone around you. Spare yourself the trouble. Just fucking, no, fucking delete Brawl, okay? Just fucking
Stop,
hey, what the fuck are you doing?
Not like that. Take him away. Oh, okay. Yeah, Greatsword has kind of gotten to him over the years, but the weapon really isn't as bad as he makes it out to be, so please don't mind his antics. Anyways, as you can see, Greatsword was pretty special in comparison to all of the other weapons. It was something new, something that people hadn't seen before, but most people didn't like it. I mean, don't forget, just because something's unique doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be positively received, and in the case of Greatsword, it was in a remarkably broken state at the time of its release, and in hindsight, this would have been totally fine. It's just that in this one specific instance, there was just this one teeny tiny problem. The fucking World Cup was right around the corner, and despite Greatsword not being fully balanced yet, it was already considered a tournament legal weapon because it had experienced 2 patches of nerfs. But even with those nerfs, Greatsword stood way above the rest of its competition, and with the weapon being unleashed onto BCX, shit really went down the shitter. You could almost see the championship as a metaphorical slaughterfest for Greatsword, with the weapon beating everything that dare cross paths with it. Because of this, almost the entire cast of legends went unseen and into the dumpster, instead being replaced with Jay and mirror matches for the whole duration of the tournament. It was tragic, especially when you consider that this was probably the first BCX that a lot of people were a part of, and I could easily imagine that this was the first time that watching BCX wasn't fun for people, be that for newcomers or longtime followers. Because of this chain of events, a lot of people left the event unsatisfied, and with it, a lot of negative feedback lashed back at BMG. It took a while longer until Greatsword received a proper nerf, which, mind you, was the biggest nerf that had ever occurred to a weapon in Brawlhalla's history up until that point. But by then, the damage had already been done, and I'm not sure what it is, but most of the newer characters that were released since haven't brought the same sense of novelty anymore. Their kits simply don't feel as fleshed out anymore, with a lot of their signatures serving the same purpose on both weapons, while on older characters, each weapon had its own distinctive identity. Now, this is just my personal view on things, but it feels like the enormous backlash after the release of Greatsword, and especially BCX, inadvertently restrained the design team's creativity and freedom. They chose an approach that brings no risks, sticking to releasing characters with less variation in their kit. But the problem comes with the fact that without risk, there can never be innovation. But as bad as this sounds at first glance, things honestly don't look as bad anymore. In recent times, the developers have really gotten their act together, and they started to genuinely make a lot of changes to Brawlhalla that the game has needed for a long time now. But regardless of these changes, I still want to shed light on what the situation was like prior to 2024. So with that, it's finally time to delve into development issues, starting with the lack of meaningful content updates. The time is early 2023, and Brawlhalla seems to suffer from a lack of new content updates, but leaving the statement at that would be disingenuous of me. So for the sake of clarity, I will discuss Brawlhalla's style of updates across 3 different time periods. Why, you might ask? Well, because if you look back in time, you'll find that Brawlhalla has basically tripled its rates of updates in the past 3 years. But let me elaborate. In 2017, we reached version 3.0. Now, if we skip to 2020, we caught up to 4.0. Now fast forward to 2023, and you'll find yourself in version 7.0, which, mind you, is crazy considering the amount of work it takes to update a game on as many platforms as Brawl gets hosted on, right? Right? And it is here that I reveal to you that in actuality, I wasted all of your time these past 5 sentences as a means to vent the fact that the information provided here is wrong. Let me explain. So when I originally wrote this section up, I had a problem with Brawlhalla's patch notes not showing up for me, and I tried on multiple occasions to make everything load. But after going through the 5 stages of grief, I just stopped bothering with it for like half a year. Fast forward way into the future, and it was only after revising my script that I realized, wait, didn't the game go to like patch notes 2.77? Which, surprise, surprise, it does! But this would entail that the update cycle 2.0 literally had 6 times the amount of updates of 7.0, which, guess what? Is exactly the case. So after attempting to load the patch notes again to double check, the gods finally heard my prayers after my 7th attempt, and they actually let me see all of the patch notes. And yep, 2.0 in fact went all the way to update 2.81. So after scrambling all of that info together and comparing it to what we have now, I've concluded that yes, the pace of updates around the time period of late 2019 and 2023 has in fact slowed down by a lot. But let's get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers. So, back around the beta of Brawlhalla, Blue Mammoth Games used to update the game on around a weekly basis, with the updates spanning quite a lot of changes, mostly centered around balancing the game and a new legend about every 35 days. And well, I think it's obvious to say that this is a massive contrast from the current 3-ish weeks or so updates, with a new legend releasing about every 100 days on average. Now, what a lot of people could argue here would be that the pace of updates has slowed down, but in return there are more changes in every single patch. But it is here where I have to say it again. That's just not really the case. If you really break the newer and older patch notes down to their core, eventually you'll come to the conclusion that BMG, or whoever's writing these patch notes, is artificially bloating the patch notes with unnecessary information. But what do I mean by that? Well, the problem I see with the current patch notes is that they're trying to sell you the illusion of many changes, when in actuality, barely anything has been updated compared to the length of their past. Like, compare these two patch notes here. The latter looks way longer than the former, but if you dumb the information down to its core components, this is how the amount of changes compare. The reason why the newer updates feel so long is because Blue Mammoth Games literally adds descriptions to anything and everything, be that skins, characters, weapon skins, or anything else lore related. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind them adding descriptions for things like battle passes because they are the major part of their updates, but the rest? They have nothing to do with the changes made to the game. And to be completely frank, I'd rather have them plop in a scuffed image of the store with the skins because like, ooh, so that's what they're selling, instead of, holy shit guys, we have meta adversary. Like, you get the point. If I'm checking the patch notes, I don't want to read all of this. I want to see this. Like, is it too much to ask for them to cut out all of the fluff and only provide the important details of that update, just like in the old updates? Maybe, but yeah. But to clarify something before anyone misunderstands me, this is not to say that Blue Mammoth Games should or has to release updates at the same pace as they did during the beta, because it is entirely unrealistic for them to keep up a pace of updates like that. I mean, the beta status is literally there to say that the game is in very active development, and you also can't forget, there's only so much you can balance in your game. I mean, think about it. Problems don't appear out of thin air. Once you balance everything there is to balance in the game, there won't be any more balancing to do, unless you want to switch up the game's dynamics by purposefully nerfing or buffing weapons. But let's say for the sake of argument, that's not the case. Then that part of the updates is going to fall out of the equation. And well, whenever that happens, you could already say, oh my god, why are Brawlhalla updates so empty? Because all of the balance changes aren't present in the patch notes anymore. Now, I'd be hard-pressed to say that this is the current situation that BMG finds itself in. But let's hypothetically say that were the case, then that would mean that they'd have more staff to allocate onto other problems like quality of life features. I mean, heck, I doubt people would even complain that much about the lack of updates if they just had more substantial and fleshed out features. But these updates barely changed any of the content in Brawlhalla. If anything, instead of adding more meaningful content like new characters or new features, they were rather used to add new cosmetics or crossovers. But cosmetics and crossovers don't really add any substance to a game. What people want are updates that actually have an impact on the player's experience, like addressing critical gameplay issues or quality of life features. And that's where I'll also introduce the final chapter of this rant, 2024 and beyond. If I had to describe the past few years, aka late 2019 to 2023, then I would describe it as a slow build-up to a lot of features the developers were trying to implement, but never a fully realized and fleshed out idea. And while this might apply to late 2023 and early 2024 as well, we are slowly seeing the developers get more creative and bold with the things they're adding. Something like the custom game settings overhaul, and with that, the addition of morph training, is something that I would have never expected from BMG before, but they did it. Add to that the fact that they're slowly implementing a few more quality of life features, and it really feels like the game is starting to actively change again for the first time in a long time. Although, to give light to a funny story, as I was writing the script across this long time period, at one point I yapped on in front of Swarft about Brawlhalla's updates, and he just told me, yo, Michi, honestly, lately they've been doing more, and I just asked, they've been doing more of what? In what was probably a passive-aggressive tone back then, and then bro suddenly whips out a fucking wall of text. I'm like, what? And by the looks of it, it was a sneak peek on a supposed video script he wanted to upload later on, which he also did. But the most important detail that he left there for me to pick up on was this quote. Though one of the biggest and smartest decisions was to move Foda to design lead position. This has and will cause a lot of positive impact in the game. And you know what my initial reaction was when he told me that? It was an unironic, no, bro, they better not invalidate all of my points before I finish this project, please not. Not to say that it wouldn't be great if they did that, then I could at least feel happy that the game fixed its problems, but yeah, as a creator, please no. But what can we conclude from all of this? Well, first of all, Over the past couple of years, Brawlhalla has been receiving less and less updates, with the contents of the updates, depending on how you view it, even trying to deceive the player into thinking that there's more content than there actually is. We can also see that BMG used to be able to churn out updates on a weekly basis in the past, but is unable to do so anymore. This could either be attributed to 1. Brawlhalla being run on so many other platforms, or 2. There not being enough things to fix or balance, which, let's be honest, isn't really the case. Or 3rd, which is a new point, Ubisoft acquiring BMG, straining BMG's freedom or workflow when developing the game. Now, this point might be coming a bit out of left field, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you look at Rayman's release, patch 3.32, you will come to see that Brawlhalla's development speed on updates started slowing down drastically going forward. And it was also at this point that BMG started to put a much bigger emphasis on cosmetics such as crossovers. And the only reason I'm not going to dunk on BMG for adding so many crossovers over the past couple of years is because Ubisoft owns them. I mean, think about it. Is it Blue Mammoth Games' choice if they want to put those crossovers in? Maybe. Probably not. It's just, I have no way to confirm it, so it's up to speculation really. And besides that, I just want to mention that it is entirely unrealistic to expect weekly updates or a new character every 1.5 months from BMG, even if Ubisoft didn't have an effect on them. But I feel like you should be able to figure out why that is with the points I laid out earlier. But to summarize, with a few changes in staff positions, most notably Foda being moved to the lead design position for example, we're able to observe that the updates have substantially increased in quality. The developers are getting more experimental, and it actually feels like the game is starting to get cool and new updates again. As this is a more recent occurrence however, at least at the time of writing the sentence, a lot of the features that will probably be added soon haven't made their way into the game yet, and for that reason I shall next discuss all the things that players have been asking for the past couple of years, be that quality of life features or more obvious features such as the next topic that we'll talk about, clans. Clans were released way back in 2016 when Brawlhalla was still a small game, and reflecting of the game size were also the clan sparrows functions at release, which if dumbed down can basically be seen as a seconds friends list. Yet if we travel 7 years into the future, we will come to see that Blue Mammoth Games has added a whole lot of nothing to clans. Yep, they never revamped clans despite how old the feature is. It was never given a real purpose outside of players sticking a glorified title to their name, or having a seconds friends list for that matter. If you actually want clans to have any kind of meaning, then you'll find that all of it is community driven. Oh, you want to have a clan battle with your friends against this other clan? Well, get ready to talk that stuff out in Discord because the game doesn't support a feature like clan battles. And while sure, the game does have the crew battles game mode, it doesn't actually have anything to do with clans themselves. Now, you could argue that this gives clans more of a social aspect. I mean, you actually have to interact with people to get anything done here, but I'm gonna be honest, it just feels wrong that Brawlhalla doesn't help the player in any way to set these things up. I mean, sure, it's nice to have a feature where you can gather people under one banner, but if it doesn't do anything more than that, then what reason is there in clans being an in-game feature to begin with? For it to feel disappointing and useless for the player? Absolutely not, but that's basically what the current system is doing. Now, this is my personal view on these things, but I think that a clan's functionality should simplify the process of doing things that you'd want to do as a clan, be that clan battles or something else entirely. But as I've already said, clans simply don't do that, and it is for that reason that Brawlhalla's clan feature feels so empty. Also, try to view this from a more casual experience. Like, let's say your friend started playing Brawlhalla, and after a while he found other friends in the community and made a clan with them, also asking if you want to be a member to do clan battles with them. But it is here when the first issue arises. Where do you even find another clan leader to contact them? And not only that, you have to talk out when you can do the clan battle, what members should play, do the time zones of the players even align, and much more. There just isn't a fast and easy process to quickly get a clan battle underway, and it's exactly here where Brawlhalla should step in and actually extend a helping hand to the player. I mean, think about it. How many casual players will actually go out of their way to seek out a clan clan battle with the current system. Not a lot of people is all I can say. Right now, clan battles are more of a niche for players who are super invested into Brawlhalla. The types of players who will join competitive clans that are literally made for this stuff. As a casual player, setting up a clan battle is too much of a hassle, and with clans not actually helping the player, there's just more steps being added to the process, which makes it infinitely more difficult to get into. And I'm convinced that there are many people who have run into this issue, me included. So I think that a lot of people would greatly appreciate it if the devs actually revamped clans and gave this neglected feature a reason to exist. Oh wait, they're actually working towards it? Holy shit, dude, let's fucking go! Fuck, where the hell did I land? Wait, what? Why? That sounds like you're forcibly inserting a section into the video here. Okay, whatever. Well, where should I start? Okay. Chill. So to give credit where credit is due, Brawlhalla's weapon system is honestly great in of itself, but there are a few issues with it that I want to point out. Take for example, wow, I really like these two weapons, which is great and all for this person, but there's a possibility of that weapon combination simply not existing. For example, Lance Guitars, which can be really disappointing for the player. Now, to be completely fair, you could say that this would get fixed with time, but there's one critical flaw with that argument. Exactly, that's not happening in Brawlhalla. Let me explain. So what should logically occur is that every weapon combination gets added to the game, and when all of the options have been exhausted, the developers will move on to add a new fully fleshed out weapon. Self-explanatory, no? But instead of doing that, the developers are set on releasing new weapons prematurely, leaving a void in the selection of weapon combinations. And while this was completely okay back when canon was added to the game, the problem has progressively become worse and worse with the addition of Orb, Greatsword, and now even Battle Boots. And in a way, it's justified. I know it makes sense for BMG to add a new weapon to give players a sense of novelty, but with the rate of new weapons they're adding, the void of weapon combinations is steadily growing, especially because characters take longer to release nowadays. We aren't back in 2017 where BMG could churn out a character after 1.5 months on average. We are dealing with a wait time of at least 3 months, and at the very most half a year. When you look at the legend graph, you'll clearly see how empty Orb and Greatsword's columns are, yet they still decided to release Battle Boots in spite of the slow rate of legend releases. It's just difficult for me to justify them adding a new weapon that isn't financial when there's still combinations left like Lance Guitars, which still haven't seen the light of day. Something I should preface though is that I could see BMG running into one problem while creating every weapon combination in Brawl, and that is the actual process of finding a concept that will fit for every character. But even then, they still have to do it eventually, so I still believe that this would be the better course of action to take for the game. Before I end the section off though, I want to bring up a problem that I've been seeing with the newer weapons like Greatsword and Battle Boots and Brawlhalla. So let me address those one by one, starting with Battle Boots. So the problem with Battle Boots is that its gimmicky part is honestly outright useless, and the reason for that is that the active inputs on Battle Boots don't really do anything for the player. Take active input Sidelight for example, which will keep you on the ground whilst the non-input version won't even make you ascend a full jump higher than the active input version. Another example of this nearly useless active input is Battle Boots D-Light, which when held keeps you on the ground while the non-input version leaves you in the air. The problem that ensues with this move however is that the only true combo with input D-Light is D-Light into N-Light, which is straight up outclassed by a non-input D-Light into Sarah or Nair, or Recovery even, in turn making active input entirely obsolete on Battle Boots. But this begs the question, why does a weapon like Scythe work then? I mean, they both have active input, no? And while the key difference between Battle Boots and Scythe lies in what purpose their active inputs have, while I would consider Battle Boots' active input to be near pointless, Scythe instead strikes open an interesting way of controlling the opponent. That is because Scythe's active input heavily controls the position in which your opponent will be launched to, while on the other hand, Battle Boots' active input controls the positioning of the player himself, and having the choice of where your opponent gets launched simply has more of an impact on your gameplay. Now, this is not to say that Battle Boots' gimmick is entirely useless. useless. It's just that the majority of its active input doesn't really have a big effect on the outcome of your gameplay. But there are a few moves in Battle Boots kit that do. And the prime example for this would be Boot Sair, which when held makes you move along with your opponent. Meanwhile, the non-input version keeps you in place and instead kicks your opponent away from you. This in turn creates two entirely different scenarios, one more offensive or defensive than the other. In this case, active input plays an active role in how you want to control the gameplay, but that simply isn't the case with the other active input moves on the weapon. So the real takeaway from this is that if you're going to incorporate a gimmick into a weapon, then that gimmick needs to have an impact on the playfield. Active input is only good when it makes a move more flexible. There's no point in giving a weapon a gimmick when something else in the kit renders that move obsolete. On Scythe, there's nothing that can replace active input Nair and Dare, as they both serve entirely different uses than their non-input versions. Likewise, Sair active input on Battle Boots actively gives you the flexibility to choose between aggressive or passive play. In that regard though, I think that Greatsword is just a fundamentally flawed weapon. Unless it were perfectly balanced, a lot of its moves aren't going to see much usage. Why, you might ask? Well, because Greatsword has over 21 moves. And when your weapon has that many quote-unquote different moves, then why even utilize most of them when a third of them alone is already good enough to win you the game? If anything, this gimmick just overcomplicates the weapon to something more than it is. And I think that a lot of people can partially resonate with the fact that Greatsword can be too overwhelming to learn and understand compared to other weapons, simply because it has too many different moves and so many paths to choose from. But like I previously stated, none of this really matters when there are more optimal options within a weapon. I just think that Blue Mammoth Games' goal while making Greatsword was to create a much more dynamic weapon than what we usually had in the game before. But in reality, the weapon is statistically played like any other, because there's no reason to utilize all the moves in the kit. If you type me down to a chair and force me to rework Greatsword, I would honestly say that it should just have a more typical moveset like the other weapons. And while this might sound boring, I honestly don't think that Greatsword's gimmick is very intuitive either, because of how overbloated its kit is with unique moves. Now, this is not to say that the weapon doesn't sound good in concept, but it just doesn't work well in execution. So what I want to preface is the fact that BeamG really has to be careful with whether the gimmicks that they're incorporating into a new weapon actually has an impact on how the weapon is played. The prime example of this being done right being Scythe. With that out of the way though, it's time to move on to the next topic, that being Brawlhalla stages. Now this is more how I personally feel about the stages, so take this section with a grain of salt. But since the release of Crystal Temple, most of, if not all of the newer maps have felt like copies of older maps. Don't believe me? Well then look no further than Small Turtle's Lair, which is literally Small Brawlhaven, but with a bigger kill zone. And then there's Western Air Temple, which unsurprisingly is just Miami Dome, but the platforms are positioned slightly higher. And instead of putting a third example here, I will instead introduce you to what I call the elite, fearsome, yet formidable 4. Boom. Here we have Apocalypse and Demon Island, which are both totally fine and dandy maps in their own regard. Okay, dandy's not the right word. Here we have both Apocalypse and Demon Island, which are both totally fine and good maps in their own regard. But if you take just a little peek below them, you'll find Small Fortress of Lions and Suzaku Castle. Now, the funny thing is that they not only feel pretty similar visually, but are also structurally the exact same map, with the only difference being the solid wall at the bottom. Now, I don't know what the developers' intentions were as they created these maps, but I would assume that they're reusing the structure of older maps to make them more tournament viable, which I mean in concept is totally fine. It's just that there's one problem I have with this. Actually, cross that. There are a lot of problems I have with that. Firstly, why create more maps for something that already sufficiently works? I get that Brawlhalla is supposed to be a competitive game, but the tournament maps is already responsible for giving people maps that are catered towards competitive play. Yet most of the newer maps are built around this competitive aspect regardless of whether they are added into this tournament map set or not. So all Blue Mammoth Games is doing here is adding more competitive-esque maps to the casual map pool. Now from personal experience, I can say that back in 2020, this wasn't a real problem, but with time they have added so many of these maps that, to be frank, nowadays I feel like picking random in the map selection is too much of a risk, because I'm much more likely to run into a map that is just from a tournament map set or virtually the same map I was playing right before, instead of a goofy and creative stage like Small King's Pass with its big ass hole. Because, man, only getting maps that feel like they're part of the tournament maps, it can get boring real quick after you've played them often enough. I mean, there's only so much I want to play on stages that are basically just a flying square in the sky. There's just a lack of variety in Brawlhalla's map pool, and this becomes especially apparent when you realize that all of these new maps are only being differentiated by 5 things. The first one being how close the kill zone is to the center of the stage. The second, where the weapon spawns occur on the stage. The third, this massive moving wall. Number 4, how tall the walls of the stages are and whether the bottom is curved or not. And lastly, 5th, where all the platforms are located in a stage, mostly with slight variations to their height or a small bit of space being created between the platforms. Personally, to me, these stages just exude this energy of mass-produced, and I don't believe that feeling to be entirely unfounded. Why, you might ask? Well, because as it is right now, it comes off more like Blue Mammoth Games is adding new maps, not because they want to create new maps for players to enjoy, but rather as a mandatory assignment for every crossover event they're having. And it is because of this problem that another issue arises that I want to discuss here. The issue in question being that maps simply feel lifeless nowadays. Let me explain. It's almost as if everything is just haphazardly thrown into a map's design without much consideration for its overall composition. A map like Twilight Grove serves a perfect example of what a cohesive map should look like. It's a cold place, everything covered in snow with some lanterns to light the pathway, with a tree making up the middle of the stage, and it is that very tree that sprouts the platforms that you fight on. You see, it's small details like these that really make a map feel alive, and Twilight Grove isn't the only example of a well-crafted stage. Take Miami Dome for example. The background has this cyberpunk-like feeling to it, giving it this vibe of a buzzy place where people would come to buy and trade things, which goes great with the ramen advert that's on the stage. And you know what? Even here there are connections to the platforms. All of these things make this map have actual substance compared to the newer maps. Even a map like Blackguard that a lot of people dislike, at least from what I've heard, gives a reason as to why the platforms moves. Where, you might ask? Well, look no further than Core's lore itself. My guy works as an assistant platform mover in Blackguard, and to me, even that suffices to make the map feel more justified and grounded in the game. But none of these details apply to any of the newer stages, which honestly just feels disappointing. After all, you are potentially going to spend thousands of hours with these maps, so I feel like more care should be put into the creation of these maps, instead of them just being thrown out as an afterthought of most crossovers or battle passes. But before we can move on to the next section, I want to briefly discuss a personal beef that I have with some of the newer stages, and that is the newer weapon spawn positions at the start of a match. Now, this might be a bit of a hot take, but in my opinion, the spawn positions on newer stages are hot ass. The older stages spawned them basically at around the same position regardless of the map structure, around 1.5 jumps and fairly close to the edge, which always made it easy for the player to know where they'd appear. But on newer maps, the spawn positions feel like a complete mess. Sometimes they'll spawn them below jump height, then at other times they'll drop them down like the spears of heaven. Some decide to appear in the middle of the stage, yet some weapons feel like spawning at the outskirts of the map, and this shit just makes me fucking grind my teeth. Now, you could say that I should just adapt and memorize their positions for every map, but what reason is there for them to suddenly change the positioning of the weapon spawns? I just can't come up with a proper reason or explanation, because it simply doesn't improve the game in any way. Heck, I would argue it's quite the contrary even. But do you know what does improve the game? Player reports and bug reports. Another feature that is often neglected even though it serves an important purpose. I think most people who have used a player report know that it basically doesn't do anything, as basically all reports get ignored, which is especially telling when you realize how badly it is developed. You can literally report people by pressing spacebar, which sends off an empty report, mind you, but I don't think that BMG would subject themselves to getting so much spam, right? And you know what's funny? They are in fact not subjecting themselves to all of that spam, because they removed the ability to describe your report entirely, and I only recently found out about it because I accidentally reported a person 4 times in a row thinking that my game was glitching the fuck out. I'm sorry. But yeah, I guess considering this change, BMG is just punishing people based on whether they get mass reported or not. But I honestly couldn't tell you. I just couldn't really find anything about it on the internet, so yeah. Moving on though, we have bug reports, and the issue I see here is firstly the lack of incentive to report bugs, and secondly the near non-existent transparency for what bugs have already been reported to Blue Mammoth Games and which bugs are currently being worked on. To elaborate on these points, what I mean by a lack of incentive is that there's no reason to report bugs. It's not like people are rewarded for it in any way. I'm not saying that Blue Mammoth Games has to reward people with per se mammoth coins or skins or anything of that sort, but having some sort of stamp or just any type of confirmation anywhere that you were the one who reported this would already feel super validating for bug hunters. It could be something as plain as citing the names of the bug reporters on the patch notes alongside the bug that they reported, because that's equivalent to engraving their names on the patch. It would make for an amazing reward, and this practice has been done in the past surprisingly, so I don't think that this proposal is too far-fetched, but that's just one example of how it could be done. What I personally would propose, however, is the implementation of a bug tracker. And if you need any inspiration on what a bug tracker should look like, then look no further than Minecraft's own official bug tracker, a website where you can report bugs with a total of 6 states to show how far development has gone on a bug, with the first being open and unresolved. The bug report has been submitted but not yet addressed or fixed by the developers. Second, resolved. The issue has been addressed by the development team and is marked as fixed. However, it hasn't been implemented in the game yet. Third, closed. The bug report has been reviewed and wasn't deemed a valid issue, or it's a duplicate of an already existing report. Simply put, a bug report that doesn't need to be addressed, or how I would call it, this bug is supposed to be in the game, brother. Fourth, in progress. The bug report has been reviewed and confirmed as a valid issue that needs attention from the developers. Fifth, confirmed. The developers have gotten wind of the problem and are actively working towards fixing the bug. 6. Reopened. The bug was marked as resolved, but issues related to it resurfaced, causing the post to be reopened for further discussions. Incorporating these 6 states for bug reports would provide 3 key advantages, those being transparency for the community. People know when a bug is being worked on and they can see when it's resolved. Second, BMG gains the ability to confirm what is actually intended in Brawlhalla's gameplay, and things that might seem like bugs at first glance could be confirmed as a closed case, or how I refer to it, an intended feature. And third, people's names would still be plastered on the bug reports, so if they ever want to brag about it, and yes, I mean that, they would have the ability to point at the bug report and say, hey, look at me, 3 years ago, I got this epic report. So you would inadvertently reward people by crediting their bug reports on that website. But an official bug tracker wouldn't just benefit the developers, it would also benefit the player by trivializing the process of explaining a bug. This is because a bug tracker can provide access to tools that aren't available in the in-game bug report. I mean, think about it. Explaining complicated topics purely over text is difficult to do, so being able to provide video footage or images alongside a well-written explanation makes grasping a bug report much easier for not just other players who would see your bug report, but also for the developers who will have to understand it. All in all though, I don't think there's much more for me to say on this topic, so moving on, I will cover long requested features that BMG just refuses to add. The community has long voiced requests for numerous features that could improve Brawlhalla's experience, yet BMG has often decided not to implement these for one reason or another. Now, I'm not saying that they should add everything and anything that people want, but like, at least add the features that are in basically every case a positive addition to the game. Things such as unranked 1v1. I know it exists, I will point something new out regarding this. Unranked 2v2 with team damage, 2v2 training mode, ping and numbers, and so much more. And while you could argue that it's reasonable for them to not add these features if they just don't want to, I mean, it's their game to develop after all, it does suck when they just don't add them to the game without really stating a reason for it. The thing is, their lack of transparency leads to players only being able to speculate what exactly the issues are with adding these features to Brawlhalla. So what I'll do in the following section is give my personal speculations on why they aren't adding some of these features, but why I feel they should still implement them into the game regardless, starting with unranked 1v1 and 2v2. Now, with the recent addition of Unranked 1v1, BMG has also decided to remove experimental mode, which I personally take issues with. Now, in the original iteration of this section, I went on a tangent about how experimental was underutilized in its features and how people were at best using it as a budget ranked 1v1. Why? Because there was no alternative for players to go with for an unranked 1v1 mode. Now, after that, I also mentioned how in the case that they do add unranked 1v1, experimental would probably turn into a wasteland with no one playing it. Because why should you? If anything, usually the test features were so small to make no real impact on the gameplay, but letting experimental run on its own would basically just split the queues for unranked 1v1 between experimental, which I don't think would be healthy for the game. But outright cutting the game mode out of the game, I don't believe that to be the best course of action. Now, originally I left this part in a cliffhanger, but the proposal I originally gave was to instead replace experimental with a test server of sorts, because in a test server you can be much more experimental in the things you can try out. But they didn't even leave the option open for that, and I find that sad. Now, I would say this is just because Brawlhalla is a bigger game now, because not only is it backed by a massive studio, but it's also gone through so many patches and has more or less been polished enough for them not to need experimental anymore. Now, this might not be the right word, but I would also describe Brawlhalla as being a lot more corporate than it used to be, because instead of working hand in hand with the players, the removal of experimental seems more like an open message of, we won't take as much feedback anymore, because they have nothing new to test out anymore. At least that's the sort of message I'm getting out of this. But I'll bring up the concept of test servers again later in the issues with balancing section. Moving on though, we will next talk about the problem that they haven't fixed, and that is the not existence of unranked 2v2, because we, the players, can only play friendly 2v2. And you know what? Team damage simply does not exist in friendly 2v2, which is basically the biggest, most influential factor that you could change in a game mode like 2v2. And not giving people an alternative version where team damage exists is diabolical. Like, picture this. You find a new potential teammate who isn't good enough to play ranked 2v2 with you yet. Then you're more or less forced into this pit where people will spam through their teammates and just completely ruin the experience for the both of you. And I feel it should be clear to BMG that this is an issue. An unranked 2v2 with team damage has been requested for a decade now, and the only reason for why people want it is because it makes sense to have it.
Metal already was insanely hard to run. Welcome to friendly where fucking that happened. Weapon throw, clash. Hold on, I want to tell that guy to kill.
Like, it's completely valid, yet Blue Mammoth Games persistently ignores this urge of the community. But it isn't just the casual 2v2 experience that suffers from this inaction, but it is also the more invested 2v2 community that is deprived of features that could help them out. And here I come with the oh-so dreaded request of 2v2 training mode. This feature has been denied numerous times by BMG, and personally I can only say, I get it. It'd be hard to implement a 2v2 training mode. Like, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, there's a lot of problems that would come with making a training mode that would feature everything but in a 2v2 setting. Like, how exactly would frame step work? Or how would the settings work? Like, would it just pause the game for the other player's screen? It's small things like those. And because of these arguably minor problems, I'm not actually proposing a training 2v2, because if I have to be completely frank, I think what a lot of people are actually asking for is an easier solution to practice team combos that isn't owning a second keyboard or controller, or having to deal with this bitch of a bot. I swear, these guys always make me want to pull my fucking hair out. I only want to illustrate that point.
Okay, the thing is, bots now are too bad, and that it's very easy to actually start a combo. Never mind.
But regardless, since the end of the goal of this argument is for people to be able to practice team combos, I have but one simple proposal. Just add an AFK bot difficulty that stands in the middle of the stage that is teleported there after death. And as scuffed as this may sound, it would still help tons of people who want to learn team combos, cause let's be honest here, not everyone can be bothered to deal with this frustrating bot who constantly wants to get on your nerves for no good reason. Training 2v2 on the other hand though would be an addition that caters more to the connoisseurs of 2v2. You know, the types of people who want to make map specific team combos or frame step team combos. And don't get me wrong, it'd be great if we could have that, but surely there's some difficulty with adding training 2v2, otherwise they surely would have done it like ages ago, right? Or maybe not. I mean, I'm just assuming things here. Maybe the developers are actually magicians and they could cook it up in like 3 minutes without breaking a sweat. But if integrating these features into a 2v2 training mode really is the issue, then I gladly take something like the AFK bot that could help players learn team combos, because this addition alone would already make a world of a difference for beginners. What I want to preface, however, is that if BMG does go out of their way to make something like this AFK bot, then I'd like to add another proposal to this concept that would make him more useful for both casual and veteran players, and that would be to add a gadget that only spawns when the AFK bot is enabled. What the gadget does is that it dictates the position where the bot will next be teleported to. This can either be done through killing the bot or by giving the bot the same properties as position reset from training mode. Although I personally think that it'd be the most convenient if we had a setting that lets you choose which one of the two presets you want in the custom lobby, as this would prevent any shenanigans of BMG having to implement a system where you could change settings during a match. But adding this gadget to the bot would basically give players an easy way to try out team combos wherever they want, except for possibly mid-air, but I think at that point we're catering to people who are way too much in the niche for team combos, but you get my point. Now, even though I said all of this, that doesn't change the fact that I'd still like to see training 2v2 become a real thing. But if Blue Mammoth Games is so set on not creating it, then I'd at least like to offer a feature that would help out beginners. And this proposal here is what I personally believe to be the best of both worlds, as it shouldn't be too difficult to implement into Brawlhalla while also being a massive help to players of all skill ranges. But in the end, this is just a simple idea that I came up with on a whim. Also, something I have to point out about the gadget idea is you would probably have to find a fix for people to not pick up the gadget while it's doing a combo when they're on, like, let's say, unarmed. But I'm sure the BMG could come up with something with enough time. Well, with all of that cleared up, I think it is finally time to move on and conclude this whole section. Brawlhalla's experienced a massive period of content drought. We were barely getting any updates of actual substance, and whenever we did get an update, we were more often than not just given the illusion of new things being added, when in actuality, almost nothing has changed. Not only is there a lack of balance changes, which I will excuse for the reasons listed here, but there's most definitely a lack of content additions that visibly impact the player's experience, which is something that I will not excuse. Additions like Unranked 2v2 or just some plain quality of life changes. But at least I can say that as of recent, things have been looking up and the developers are finally picking up the pace with, I assume, the reason being the changes in staff positions at Blue Mammoth Games. As of now though, only the future can tell where the game's headed, and the fact that things are finally looking better now doesn't change the fact that there's a literal treasure trove of suggestions out there that could be added, but just aren't being added. But whether Blue Mammoth Games will go against the idea of adding these features yet again is something that I simply don't know, but I for sure can tell you that people would be happy about it, and I'm certain that the community would welcome BMG with open arms if they did that. With all of that said though, I would say that the discussion for this topic is done. What I want to take a look at next, however, is the experience of the casual player. And it is when you start the game that the first problem already arises. Man, I'm being harsh. But yeah, introducing Brawlhalla's user interface. Now, I've gone around and asked quite a few people if an update to Brawlhalla's interface would be good for the game or not, and everyone agreed that Brawlhalla kind of needs one, and that yes, a change to the UI would in fact have a positive impact on the game. Now, I'm not a designer, but like, ask yourself this. Why does the title screen have a store and battle pass when literally every player under the sun uses their button counterparts at the top right corner? Next, why is there a play button that doesn't lead you to all game modes but instead refers you to 5 game modes, 2 of which I would argue even really aren't that important to Brawlhalla? Now, what I want to shoot home here is the fact that the user interface is just not intuitive to new users, and there's way too much unnecessary clutter in its design, in my opinion at least. Like, more often than not, it just doesn't do a good job in leading the player to the things he's looking for. And while I don't have a layout drafted out and prepared for Blue Mammoth Games to implement, because I quite in fact do not work for them, I will give some of my personal ideas and input on what exactly the issues I have in the user interface are and what could potentially be done to remedy some of their problems. Now, before I start ranting on for about 3 pages worth of text though, I do want to say that all of these problems I'm going to discuss could be solved with the game simply showing the player around everywhere at least once by just blacking out the whole screen, just like many other games do. But what I argue about here is the current user interface Brawlhalla has and the reasons why I think it sucks for beginners. With that out of the way though, let's start with the main menu screen. First things first, you will find the play button, which leads you to free for all, strikeout, friendly, unranked 1v1. Oh wait, they added that. And lastly, duels. Now, under the term play, you could literally envision every game mode there is in Brawlhalla, right? The thing is just, the word play can be misleading in this context, considering how much custom games has in store, for example. Now, what I will praise BMG for, because I criticized it in the older version of this section, thanks for finally adding unranked 1v1 instead of experimental, because like, how are you supposed to know that experimental 1v1, which sounds like you're entering chemistry class of all things, would be the alternative to Brawlhalla's ranked 1v1? As a newbie, you'd expect something like, I don't know, unranked 1v1 to exist as its own game mode, which it didn't for like an entire decade, but you should get the point. Moving on though, we have the rank section. Now personally, I'm cool with it, except for one slight detail, and that is the join ranked button. But to explain why I take issues with it, we have to move on to custom games. Why? Well, because there's a join room button here as well, with the exact same function. You can use the join ranked and join room button both for the same purpose interchangeably. And for those who think that the join ranked is tailored towards ranked lobbies only, you're wrong. All lobbies are considered the same, probably because you can change lobby types within the same game room. The only thing that differentiates a lobby is its room number. So there isn't a reason for either this or this button to exist. Then how about we just put it on the title screen instead? I mean, if you think about it, the join room button is used for any type of lobby, and you're always going to use it to join your friends, assuming you don't use the friends list. And putting it on the title screen would make it more easily accessible than to This way, people also wouldn't have to choose between the one or the other button. Now below that, we will also find the battle pass and the store, where I will once again refer back to the beginning. So why do you have these buttons on the title menu when they're literally at the top right corner of the screen? I have never seen a player actually use the main screen battle pass to check what their quests are. And you know what? I know why that is. It's because it isn't intuitive to go out of your lobby just to check your battle pass. You just look up at the top right corner of the screen and click on it there. The only reason I see for the battle pass in store to be on the main menu is so people can find out that they exist to begin with. But when you've played the game for a few days, you just come to know all of that stuff, especially with things like the shop, since the green thumbnail sticks out like a sore thumb. It's just straightforward that everything you require is easily accessible up there, without any unnecessary features cluttering that place up, and that's what makes out a good user interface. The next point of discussion though would be the custom game room. So going back to the title screen, the first problem that we will come across is right about here. The issue I take with this screen in specific are the public custom game rooms, and probably not for the reasons that you'd expect. I think most people come across the public games feature as a beginner, check it out once, and then completely forget about its existence. Now, if you asked me where the issue lies, I would simply say it's too much of a hassle to click on browse rooms. But no, really. I mean, think about it like this. Most people would probably let themselves in on a random public game room if they randomly saw it on their screen, because doing something on a whim is easy, but that concept simply doesn't apply here, because you don't join a public game room on a whim. You actually have to commit yourself to clicking this button and see if there's an interesting lobby for you to join. Whether you'll be met with disappointment or not is purely up to luck, and people don't want to do something if it has the potential of wasting their time for no reason. So I propose this. Why not just put the list of public game rooms next to the other options, private room and public room? Doing this would put public custom game lobbies much more into the spotlight, and they'd be so much easier to access for people. And for those wondering, the inspiration for this feature comes from scrolling YouTube. I mean, if you think about it, when you watch a video and scroll, you constantly see this list of crisp videos trying to catch your attention with its thumbnails. Brawl's system, on the other hand, is more like YouTube, but this list list just got outright removed, and you could only find videos by searching them out yourself. And there are literal browser extensions for YouTube that disable this very feature, literally because people get sucked into watching multiple hours of content because they can't stop clicking on more videos. And if that doesn't showcase how effective this sort of approach can be, then I don't know what will. I just think that it'd be incredibly cool for Brawlhalla's computer platform, because it would make socializing with random people so much easier, and I do believe that one of the greatest joys is just meeting new people in Brawlhalla. In the end, I just think that it'd be pretty neat to have this, especially for the more casual players in the community. Now, as far as the private and public room buttons concern me, they are both fine as is. Juxtaposed to the public game rooms experience, however, we have offline play. Now, if you'd hear offline play, you will probably expect something like a local lobby, right? Where you can chill and spend time with your friends at home. And while we might have this in the form of Couch Party, yeah, I do think that the name offline play is kind of misleading, because here we also offer useful game modes like the tutorial and training mode, as well as the tournament mode against bots as a cherry on top. I don't think this one matters quite as much though, but it's fun. Now, ponder this for a second. If somebody is brand new to the game, would you expect them to go to offline mode of all things to find the tutorial? I mean, they have no way of knowing that the tutorial mode is located here. And let's be honest here, the play button is just objectively more enticing from a design perspective. I wouldn't be surprised if most people enter this game assuming that there's no tutorial to begin with, because who in their right mind would squish something so essential to a game between all of these other buttons and then hide it behind one of them as well? Like, sure, I appreciate the fact that tutorial mode isn't forced upon you, because fuck, you can make tutorials an awful mess, but that doesn't change the fact that it causes problems when you make it near impossible for players to find on their first session, because contrary to popular belief, yes, some people do want to go through tutorials, and tutorials are almost always essential in fighting games. Like, I shit you not, it took me 200 hours of playtime until I figured out that gravity cancelling existed, because information was scarce back then when I first started playing, hence the jokes about gravity cancelling looking like a cheat. And I very much believe that showing the player where the tutorial at least is would genuinely be helpful for beginners. Oh, and also training mode. This shit is a godsend, because this thing is goated. I rest my case. But something else that's godly in Brawlhalla is its lore, which you can find behind the next button in question, Meet the Legends. And well, I honestly have nothing to critique here. If there's anything I'd have to complain about, it's not that it's badly placed and that it simply doesn't belong to the title screen, but more so that Brawlhalla puts so much importance into building its lore, yet never doing anything with it, which just really feels like a waste. Although I won't say that they should implement a story mode into the game, as this would, for one, be very expensive to make, and secondly, be way too much effort for them to make, considering they'll most likely get no real returns out of it. But in the off chance that they do create the story mode, let me be real, if they make it a paid DLC, I'm going to throw hands, bro, because that's the last thing I want to see. I mean, for Christ's sakes, it's a free-to-play game. I'd actually crash out if they paywall a feature like that. But regardless, there's also a Reddit post that argues why a story mode wouldn't work well for Brawlhalla. And while I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything it says, it does list out a few good reasons why making a story mode wouldn't be realistic for BMG. But with Brawlhalla steadily improving animations, I think that seeing some scenes out of Brawlhalla characters' lives would just be really cool. Like, give us some insight on what they do at their time in Brawlhalla, from cool fights to their daily lives, their backstories, and how their rivalries are going. I just think that breathing life into the game through the animations would be a very nice way of appreciating the characters more. But that just about wraps up my point on Brawl's lore as well. Since we're done discussing the title screen section of the video now though, I would say it's time to move on and take a look at the user interface of the custom game room itself. Before we dive into that, however, I want to tell you another short story of something that happened to me personally. So, funnily enough, as I did research for the video, I came up with this idea for a setting that lets everyone edit their own damage values, the amount of stocks they have, and other things of that nature. And you know what? I was pleasantly surprised to find that feature actually being in the game, in the form of handicaps. It blew me away that they added that. I just thought, Wow, that's really cool. So I asked one of my friends when that feature was added, and he told me, oh, it was released alongside the higher bot difficulties. What? No, that was 3 years ago. Surely not, right? Yes, it was. I double checked. And I didn't know this whole time, despite downing multiple hundreds of hours into custom synths. What I want to convey with this is simple. Too many features feel hidden in this game, be that the normal settings or any of the game mode's unique settings. Imagine you're new to the game, you will just assume, oh, settings, that's neat, and that all of these options are all of the relevant settings there are. But mighty no, there's a second page, and you're never told. And there are some pretty useful features here as well, like the ability to change the room, type, or region, which is insanely convenient. But unless you're told about its existence, there's a high likelihood you'll just never find out about it. Heck, even now I see players asking for 2v2, and instead of just switching the room's game mode, both players instead just quit the lobby just to create an entirely new room. Why? Because they don't know any better. You simply don't find these features on your own because of how badly they're located in the interface. If you ever learned about these features, it's most likely because you saw a friend of yours doing it or in some video or something. But a game should be able to lead you to useful features like this on its own, and not through word of mouth. This becomes especially important when something like rank comes into play with its ranked settings, but that's something that I'll touch upon later in the video again. What I want to say with this argument though is that they need to make these options more clear to the player. Like, don't unnecessarily hide these things behind a barrier known as small button at the top. At the very least though, I will say that in the updated UI, it is easier to tell that there is another button you can click on up here, because in the old UI, it blended a lot more into the background. Still though, I feel like most beginners will see absolutely no reason to press this extra button, because what they will care about are the settings of their lobby, and after you're used to that, you very easily tunnel vision into never checking out that other button. So my proposal on how you could fix this problem in custom games would honestly be to combine both of these pages into one. Now, this is just a concept design, so go on, flame me for not knowing how to edit images properly, but regardless, I don't really see any issues with the idea itself, and while there are mixed opinions on it, some saying it's nice, some disagreeing with the idea, and some saying that it isn't really necessary, I still feel like this would be better to have for the sake of transparency. Before I conclude this section off, however, I want to make one thing clear. Would people complain about an UI overhaul? Absolutely. There is no doubt that would happen. I mean, as a player, even I would be against overhauling the UI of the game because of how used I am to it. But I still believe that some of these changes would be healthier for the game in the long run, as it helps newer players get more easily into the game. Oh, also, I completely forgot to mention Brawl of the Week, so I'll flash my opinion on that on the screen right now. But with that topic out of the way, I next want to cover Brawlhalla's unique game modes. As mentioned way back in the video, some of the game modes such as Kung Fu or Brawl Ball have gained quite a sizable following because of how fun they are to play. But then there are other popular game modes, specifically Horde or Tempo Climb, which in my opinion exemplify Brawlhalla's potential as a casual game. But to elaborate on that, I shall introduce you to Brawlhalla's casual gameplay. Again. Man, V2 apparently. Actually, it's the surround version. Now, Horde is an insanely fun game mode to play with friends. Its concept is simple, with its onslaught of enemies that you have to fend off. Tempo Climb, on the other hand, features an ever-moving stage with traps laid throughout the whole map, something that I will refer to as stage hazards in this video. Both of these game modes are great at adding their own flair to the game, although just because these 4 game modes are well received by the community doesn't mean that every single game mode is. While some of them might be creative, others are basically a copy of already existing ones, with slight tweaks to how they're played, but I won't delve deeper into that topic, as you should create your own opinion on these game modes by actually just playing them yourselves. If you ask me what game modes I personally like to see in Brawlhalla though, I will probably say 8-player free-for-alls, or what I'd refer to as that one type of lobby that streamers always have open. I mean, Think about it. Currently we have 4-player free-for-alls, so why not add an 8-player variation to that? I don't really see the problem in doing that. I think it'd be a great addition to the game, as it would make matches much more chaotic while also bringing the return of maps like Big Lost Labyrinth that were made for the sole purpose of 8-player matches. And it is here I want to bring up the concept of stage hazards again. I personally find Temple Climb to be extremely fun and chaotic with friends, as it adds an extra layer of features to the game that force you to constantly stay on the move, and I feel like it'd be amazing to pair this idea with 8-player free-for-alls. Now, ding ding ding, the stage hazards don't have to be as extreme as per se Temple Climb, where you're in constant threat of getting fucked over by the stage. Far from it probably, but instead just small stage hazards that don't affect the battlefield too much. And well, if you take a look at some of the already existing massive stages like the Enigma or Lost Labyrinth, you will come to realize that they already include such stage hazards like the map transforming or moving platforms. Most likely because a stage that changes over time is a better fit than a static map when you have so many players on the field. I think that stages could be created where more things happen than Enigma and Lost Labyrinth, Starlight Faults, but also not so much to the point that it's overbearing like Temple Climb. There's simply a middle ground that BMG would have to find, but I gladly see BMG lean into these ideas and experiment around with them, because I genuinely feel like a lot could be done with these ideas. I'd totally be up for seeing them create an 8-player shipwreck faults where things actually happen in the stage, like the shipwreck in the background shooting cannonballs at the stage, or the ship that you stand on breaking apart and you falling into it. You know, something creative like that. But as it currently stands, for normal map rotation, the only stage hazards in the game are transforming stages and moving platforms. And as of now, these are far and few between if anything. Okay, massive correction here, because this is too cooked for just a note. So basically, during the recent months, like around June, I would say it's around patch 9.08, they didn't write down when they made the change, it's just not mentioned anywhere. They added Temple Climb, Siege of Lions, and Mustafar into the map rotation for 1v1 and 2v2. Which is ridiculous. Those maps don't belong in there. The same kind of goes for Small Feat Generator. The thing is, the really funny thing is, they, in patch 9.09, if you search for Q, we updated the map sets for the unranked 1v1 queue because they realized how bad that was. So I'm wondering, like, why the hell are these in here? This is the 1v1 map set. This is ridiculous. So I go into experimental really fast, and I just like look at it. Well, not experimental, unranked 1v1. And I like look through all of the maps that are in here, and I see that they're not in here. So it's just a custom games bug. I don't know how they can cook this much. It is actually ridiculous. There are like so many levels to this. Oh my fucking god. Please try to fix things properly when you change to actually look at the whole game instead of just switching one feature. God fucking no. It's so awful researching some of these things. Back to the video though, thanks. There are also a few other ideas that could be implemented for casual play, like imagine Thunder Guard Stadium, but the audience in the background throws items into the stage for the players to use. It'd be horrible for something like Ranked, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't need to be a part of Ranked. These would simply be fun additions to the stages that could actually make them a unique experience. And for a new player, it will probably be really fun to experience a free-for-all where every stage has a new gimmick in store. It adds an extra layer of liveliness to the matches you can have with friends, and there really should be a bigger emphasis on these types of features for bigger stages. But that about covers everything I wanted to say about the casual experience of Brawlhalla. So moving on, we have FOMO, the fear of missing out. A lot of the new additions over the past few years can be associated with this lovely buzzword. These are features that you can only get once and are gone forever afterwards. For example, battle passes, titles, or colors. Now personally, I don't mind their existence, but I feel like I should at least briefly poke fun at player titles because, to be honest, some of these titles sound absolutely bonkers in this game, and I don't know what has possessed Blue Mammoth Games to add some of these, because like, Nick stole my soul? What does that even mean? Am I too much of an unk to understand this? Am I just a boomer? Am I too ripe for my own good at the age of 20? I don't get it, man. I just feel like the one chill player to brawl with, because what's better than to just be chill, cool, and cozy? But then you realize there actually is something better than being a chill player to brawl with, and that is to be a brawler who's in it for the gold, because that's how capitalism ought to be, right? And it doesn't even leave off there. It gets even funnier when you see people using these titles without a name or a clan, so all you're left with is to say, yo, nice to meet you, Reveler. And you bet that these people feel like the edgelords that they are whenever somebody calls them their title. But besides that though, personally I would consider myself more of a lover than a brawler. Like, honestly, I'm not even sure what purpose player titles are supposed to serve at this point. The jokes write themselves. If anything, they feel more like some absurdist joke or something. I mean, I guess they can look cool. They are a cosmetic feature after all, but from my experience it feels more like they cluttered a name more than necessary of anything by squishing all of these names together. Although, thinking about it hypothetically, it would be really funny to think about people like multiple years in the future potentially saying something along the lines of, you pathetic fool, I bet your boss that you're not going to beat me. After all, I am a season 20 Kung Fu veteran, and you, yes you don't even compare to me. You're like a midget to me. And this ball is my only friend in these past 5 years. And you'll just think to yourself, nah bro, into what kind of shit has this game devolved into? I don't know anymore. But before I make more unfunny jokes that make me want to end myself, we should rather move on to the next section, issues with balancing. Now, before I start ranting on this section, I want to make one thing clear. Brawlhalla is a lot more balanced than most people give it credit for. Now, yes, some weapons might feel unfair, but no matchup is unwinnable in this game. A proper example of an unbalanced game would be Super Smash Bros. Melee and the gap in balance there exists between characters like Bowser and Fox, for example. And that gap in balance like this is what one should consider unfair. But in Brawlhalla, such a cliff in balance simply doesn't exist. So with that out of the way, I want to tackle two problems that Blue Mavkins have with how they approach Brawlhalla's balancing. The first being the fact that Brawlhalla has no public testing servers, and the second being the lack of pro and community feedback for balancing. Now, don't get me wrong, the developers definitely keep many lines of communication with the community, but it still feels like they mostly neglect community feedback, be that from pros or casual players. Now, I know that pros don't necessarily know what's best for a game. What I mean by that is, since most of the balance changes that they will push for probably wouldn't coincide with the casual experience of Brawlhalla. TLDR, pros will push for balance changes that would be optimal for the competitive experience of the game, but that wouldn't necessarily entail that the game becomes more fun to play with those changes. That still doesn't mean that we should disregard their experiences, because if anyone knows how to balance the game, then it would most definitely be them. So for the sake of argument, I will drop this detail for this discussion. Now, I often hear players arguing that it'd be a horrible idea for a BMG to take balance feedback from competitive players. Now the question is, why? Why would it be a bad idea? And well, the answer to that question is quite simple in a way. It's because humans are biased. I mean, ask yourself this. What stops a pro from suggesting nerfs against the weapons they can't deal with and buffs for the weapon they use? Now, I personally don't believe that most pros would do this, since a lot of pride is associated with their title, but it's a valid argument to bring up nonetheless. And because of that, I want to bring up one proposal on how BMG could approach taking feedback from pro players. That being, instead of interviewing pros and talking with them alone, why not discuss balance changes in groups? The reason I think this concept will work is because the people in question would shut down each other's arguments. Like, let's say hypothetically, one person says spear's broken, but someone else disagrees. Then an argument would ensue, and they could start a debate to figure out to what degree spears should be balanced. And if the initial statement holds ground, then Blue Mammoth Games can decide whether a tweak to the weapon is necessary or not. And if you need a real life example of this concept, which really shouldn't be hard to find, then let me introduce you to no less than politics. There's a reason why most social problems are addressed through a collective agreement instead of just one person's opinion. And if this were implemented properly, I think it could do wonders for Brawlhalla and its community, especially when a discussion is available to the public. BMG almost never explains their thought process behind a nerf or buff, and I think it'd be reasonable to say that a lot of the stigma behind balance changes comes from this very fact. Actually hearing the entire thought process of what led the developers to their decisions would put a lot of people at ease. And in cases where people still disagree, it would only spark further discussion, because now people know what the thought process behind the balance change was, and with that knowledge, they can actually partake in the discussion with the same knowledge as the developers. But to pop a bubble here, I won't claim that this proposal doesn't have its risks. Maybe people would get mad at a specific player for holding an opinion they don't agree with, and I think most of us have seen how bad witch hunts can get on the internet, but there will always be people like that, and if we tie ourselves down with that mindset, we are bound to get a stagnating game. I just believe that the implementation of this idea would greatly impact the game's balancing and benefit the community itself. An extension of this idea, however, would be the incorporation of multiple rank ranges to this discussion. Yes, pros are the ones at the peak of the game's mechanical skill, but the people below them, the Valhallans, the Diamonds, the Platinums, and even the Golds maybe, also have their own view of the game. And I've already said this before, how a pro would balance the game wouldn't entail the best experience for everyone. I would say it's dishonest to invalidate the opinion of all players below Diamond. I mean, fucking hell, there are Platinums that have more playtime than me, so it'd definitely be interesting to hear their opinions regardless of their rank, but that's easier said than done. I think the most difficult factor for this entire idea to work would be to find people who can actually partake in such a conversation to begin with. BMG should definitely find people who firstly can critically think and voice their opinions clearly to the audience, mentioning both the pros and cons of a balance change, and secondly, they'd have to be open-minded. If somebody counters their argument, then they should possess the ability to consider what the opposing party is saying. After all, the killer of discussions is when a person is too ignorant to consider someone else's point of view. The only problem with finding these people is that they're rare. Maybe not like a shiny Pokemon rare, but not everyone likes to ponder on why, let's say, Spear is broken and how it could be realistically be balanced without altering the base weapon, because there's genuinely a lot of thought that goes into a question like that. It's the entire reason why I decided not to discuss weapon balancing in this video. It's too broad a topic for one single person to take on, me included, because there's so many factors that go into balancing a game properly, and it's really easy to get lost in the mix. That's why I personally believe that these group discussions could give great feedback to BMG, as they'd hear the opinion from many sides of the community. Moving on though, we have another suggestion that I've seen pop up from time to time, and that is to why not hold community polls for balance changes? Which at first glance sounds totally reasonable, but if you think about it twice, you'll quickly come to the conclusion that it is a horribly flawed idea. That's because the majority of the community consists of either golds or plats. They would just dominate the polls by taking 90% of the votes, and if this were to happen, it probably wouldn't bring forth the best of balance changes. What I do propose, however, is for Blue Mammoth Games to carry out community polls that aren't for balance changes, but instead for quality of life features, so the community can tell them what features they want the most. At the same time, it will also reassure the community that the developers are actually working towards a goal that the players want, something that they like. And that's already disregarding the fact that it's pretty liberating to have the ability to choose for the thing you want, instead of having to wait and see what comes next. But this proposal stems more from a personal wish of wanting to see what the developers are working towards, because right now, we're simply awaiting Pandora's box where an addition could be absolutely amazing, or go to absolute shit. And you know what? That's what test playing is for, introducing the lack of public test servers for new features. Now, some people might come running to me saying, but what about experimental? Doesn't it already serve that purpose? To which I say, yes, experimental does in fact work as Brawlhalla's test server pretty much. And don't get me wrong, it is good in concept, but also it got removed. But to keep my critique on experimental up because it leads into the original point, I want to reiterate, I think the experimental mode was underutilized with both the features that are being tested out and the interest that people actually had with giving feedback to the developers. And the reason I'm saying this ties way back onto the point that experimental basically worked as Brawlhalla's glorified and budget unranked 1v1 game mode. Most people who played experimental didn't play it to try out the new hot test feature in the block. They just wanted to spar with random people without losing their precious elo. Now, this isn't to say that experimental doesn't work. Far from it. The fact that BMG was squeezing such a big pool of people into the test features will at least get some people to talk about it, even if it's against their will. But the people who are genuinely invested and the ones who are going to give a more in-depth explanation on the features and their problems will probably go on a test server of their own volition anyway. Like, it takes a certain type of person to go on these early access servers and test these things out, and it is those people's feedback that is the most precious most of the time. Now, of course, you could argue that a testing server would lack people who are willing to try new test features out, so it'd just be entirely dead, but wouldn't that also kind of prove my point that people didn't play experimental to give their opinions on what's being tested? I mean, on a test server, the majority of the people would basically be doing the same thing as volunteering, and those volunteers would definitely give more thorough and well thought out criticism than those who just play the game mode as a substitute 1v1. But even if we ignore that point, the actual reason I'm proposing test servers, and the reason I said experimental feels underutilized, is because of the limitations it's tied down by. Let me explain. The crucial advantage that a test server will provide is the scope of gameplay features that the developers could test out. In experimental, the developers are limited to testing small-scale features like dash changes, small visual changes on mechanics, on very rare occasions new attacks, and so on. But they can't really go on beyond that. And earlier, I already mentioned the disaster that was Greatsword's release, but something like Jae-yun couldn't be released into experimental. He's an entirely new character, but in a testing server, something like a new character could be examined by players and be balanced accordingly before release. Now, I know part of this argument is due to my own feelings, because it kind of ticks me off whenever BMG adds something to the game and just vehemently refuses to revert a change because it's already in the main game, just get used to it, Mr. Koenig Michi. But in a test server, they would have the option to revert such changes since they haven't been implemented on a mass scale yet. Moving on though, I would also strongly advise Blue Mammoth Games to inform players about the existence of their feedback categories on the official Brawlhalla Discord, because I don't think everyone's aware that they're receptive to feedback, and no, I don't mean they should mention it once on stream, they should just have some note or anything in game, as not everyone watches the official Brawlhalla streams. Imagine you just made a feedback button right below experimental, which doesn't really work anymore as they removed experimental, but you get the point. How many people would just write a short note because of how accessible a box like this would be? Seriously, accessibility is the key to making people do the things you want them to do, because if it's a hassle, people just aren't going to bother. What people will bother about though is complaining if a game's performance isn't good. Now, before I start spitballing my next train of mildly stupid takes, I just want to make clear that I want to address some of the issues in the game's performance that I've come across as a player or have heard of from other players in the form of complaints. However, I will have to make some things clear. The clips I will be showing in the background all fall under one of two categories. The first being frame drops and general performance problems. Always appreciate it. I love lag spikes.
Nice weapon.
That fucking hit for me. I heard this sound.
It did for me too, but
Basically, your game's stuttering, freezing, rollbacks, or dropping frames entirely, where anything you input will simply be ignored by the game. All of these can be attributed to performance issues, so either your PC is garbo, or the game code is badly optimized. The second is lag. This covers people randomly teleporting off the edge or just your game pissing itself. This can either be blamed on Brawlhalla service losing their shit or your internet connection sucking. With all of this clarified, however, it is time to start this section off. A point that I made pretty clear at the beginning of the video is that Brawlhalla is a very smooth game even with low specs, but for some godforsaken reason, the game just lags for some people's computers regardless of their setup. Yes, the game can run well on just about anything, but it can run stellar if you have the most cracked setup in all of human existence. You could literally have access to a NASA computer, and if your game doesn't feel like it, you'll still get plagued by lag spikes and the sort. Although you could entirely blame this issue on the settings of the user themselves, there are so many videos and posts on the internet that talk about how you optimize the game. Yet regardless of those optimizations, some people's games still lag. And when that's the case, I think it's fair to assume that you've done something wrong. The player going out of their way to improve the game's performance should never be a requirement, but rather an alternative. And as I've just said, optimizing your game doesn't necessarily mean that all of your problems suddenly go away. They only minimize the damage that can be done. But as a player, I don't really know what the underlying problems for this are. The only guess I could make is spaghetti code, the server's having a problem, or something else entirely. And since I didn't really know anything, I decided decided to at least check if someone else had done any extensive research on this topic. Sadly, however, I've winded up empty-handed, and for that reason, I implore you to take my claims in this section with a grain of salt. I just feel like this topic should be discussed regardless, because I have seen countless people complaining about issues they've run into, like lag spikes, frame drops, or just stuttering.
This is suicide again, Michi.
Yeah. No! What is this? I am down here.
Yeah, good game, bro. Good GG.
As well as trivial things like dropped inputs. All the dropped inputs are usually considered to be an excuse made by players, and as such are usually treated like a skill issue by most players. From what I've seen, however, most people put the blame on easy anti-cheat for causing a lot of the lag in the game. And while yes, there does seem to be a trend with people saying that easy anti-cheat lags them, I couldn't really find any definitive proof on this, so I can't confidently claim that easy anti-cheat is responsible for this issue. One problem that I do see with Brawlhalla, however, are the unstable servers. But before I talk about them, let me give a huge disclaimer. I might be spreading misinformation here. Don't take my word for it. Research the topic for yourself if you believe my takes, as all the materials required to do so are available to the public. But before that, let me tell you how I even came to this conclusion with yet another story. A few months ago, I was playing some Unranked 2v2 with my friend, and he was complaining about the game not registering his input. I just muttered, yeah, I guess, because I got used to him saying it so much. To me, it had basically become a common occurrence for his inputs to drop, so I didn't really pay it any mind. But with time, it really started to get on his nerves, like he was getting pissed. So as he slowly went through the 5 stages of grief, he decided to ask a friend of his if he had access to a ping checker, and surprisingly, he did. So we both quickly got on the game and excitedly tested it out, and what we came across was something that we could have never expected. Brawlhalla servers consistently spiked in ping. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think this usually happens when you have good netcode. But yeah, back to the story. We felt dumbfounded by this discovery. I was baffled and I couldn't believe my own eyes. Meanwhile, he was ecstatic about having an excuse now. So over the course of the next few days, we dug a bit further into the specifics of these spikes. And now I'll present the observations me and my friend have made. The lag spikes usually tend to have an increase of around 50 to 60% of your average ping. To give an example, my ping consistently stays around a range of 18 to 19, with spikes that go up to 30. Now, this difference in ping isn't big enough to affect your gameplay in any real way, hence I personally almost never feel dropped inputs myself, but this problem progressively gets worse the higher your average ping is. My friend sits at an average ping of around 41 to 43, and he can spike into the hundreds, an amount that's almost big enough to genuinely cause some issues with your input. But this is where the real problem comes in, and that is that these are the more consistent spikes on Brawlhalla server. When there's a ton of player traffic, then these ping spikes get even worse, which does mean that player activity and server performance have a correlation, which, well, I mean, they obviously should, why the fuck should they not? But that also means that there's an inherent factor of, I don't want to play at peak hours if it's gonna fuck over my gameplay, because playing with a handicap like that isn't fun. And this is me talking from personal experience. Me and my friend often played at night because he refused to play when there were too many players online. It simply felt like our games performed better in those late hours. Why? Because it did. Also, player count correlating with server performance was also further confirmed by the fact that the spikes calmed down a lot as the season went on. Most likely because there were more active players at the beginning of the season, but who knows, it might just be placebo at this point. Anyways, when the servers do get strained, however, there is still a possibility of your ping spiking massively despite a lower online play count, and on one occasion we even documented the servers absolutely losing their shit. Now, this is not to say that this is a common occurrence, but I caught it happening 4 times in the same month, all of which I didn't record, blame my woozy ass for that. But I don't want people to undermine how massive this problem really can be, because whenever the servers really do hit the shitter, I visibly felt some of my inputs dropping. And you know what the worst part was? The game displayed a perfectly green bar. Now, Don't get me wrong, but if my connection to the server is dying, then for all intents and purposes, I'd love to know that I should take a break from the game, but the bars clearly weren't reflecting the information that they should have, and that should never be the case. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if problems like this are the reasons why Blue Mammoth Games is so persistently against adding ping and numbers. But that's me getting a bit presumptuous. There's always a good chance that my assumptions are incorrect, but still, it just feels weird that they seem so set on never adding a quality of life feature like this, as it really wouldn't be hard to implement, but I digress. Oh, and before anyone comments, the ping checker might be fake, Michi, I double checked. It uses the same address that is listed on the official Brawlhalla lack support, so if you call the ping checker fake, then the official website is also listing a fake server as well. Oh, and let me add a cherry on top. While I was testing all of these IPs out, I also found out that the issue is relevant to all regions. So, yeah, at least we European chums aren't the only ones who deal with this shit. But anyways, I only tested this with a few of my friends, like 5 to 7 people, and they all have had the same results, which was the reason I felt justified in bringing up this topic to discussion. But do not let that fool you. Some friends doesn't equate to a study conducted with thousands of players. That's why I said that I might be spreading misinformation here, because you know what? Maybe all of us just have garbage internet connection to the Brawl servers in specific, but it just feels like too much of a coincidence that I got the same results with everyone I asked. But you know what? Instead of listening to me speaking out of my ass, just try it out for yourself. Try it out at different times of the day. Sometimes the Brawl servers are stable enough to have no issues, but at other times you'll probably experience the same thing as us. And I'll be honest, I would gladly see someone actually delving deeper into the topic and put more research into this. I don't have a PhD in computer science and networking or whatever, and I don't feel knowledgeable enough on the topic, but I can say with confidence that this is not normal. But with that, we have just about wrapped up the game's flaws, so let me conclude it all once again. Brawlhalla is covered in flaws that affect the game negatively, and they make an undoubtedly amazing game into something much less than it could be. While some of them make for the basis of why Brawlhalla is such a fun game, some of them are just flawed by design. And whilst I for sure haven't covered every flaw there is, because that'd be way out of the scope of what I could discuss in this video, there isn't a definitive answer to how you should view or handle these problems. I'm not a moral authority who can perfectly judge everything. No one is like that, and every proposal can come with its own negatives, mine included. And just to make this clear once again, all of the things I've said here were meant in good faith. I don't mean any harm to the game. After all, I love Brawlhalla. Otherwise I never would have made this video to begin with. So if anyone from Blue Mammoth Games hears this, please consider the things I've said. We all only have to profit from the game improving as a whole, and I think everyone yearns for Brawlhalla to improve as a game. There are so many people out there who are passionate about this game, even more so than I am. And I can assure you that they will support your game, but you need to give them a better platform to voice their opinions. Don't make it so hard for us to reach out to you and become more transparent with the community if there's a highly requested feature. If there's a highly requested feature, then explain why you won't add it. Or just add it. And please, don't just mention it once on stream, make a list of all those features and why you don't add them, so people in the future can also see why you won't add something that they want, because all you're doing by not being transparent with the community is fueling a fire that didn't even need to be lit. And in the end, the only ones who have the power to change Brawlhalla for the better are you, the developers. Well, I don't think there's anything more to conclude here. I think a full recap on everything is kind of unnecessary, so let's just jump into the second last section of the video, that being general suggestions for the game. I will merely list a few of my ideas that could potentially improve the game's overall experience and why. For the sake of simplicity, I will also differentiate between the following 3 categories: quality of life features, community additions, and ranked suggestions. Beginning with quality of life features. To start this section off, having a button to abort a custom game room match would be really convenient to have. I think people unintentionally starting a custom game happens pretty often. Like, let's hypothetically say you forget to set the custom game room settings from time to stocks, or your friend is just trying to finish a video in the background real quick and the game picks a map for him without him realizing. It's just really common occurrences like these that this could fix. And there's no way you're convincing me that this has never happened to you if if you played this game for any reasonable amount of time. But I digress. I don't really see any way how this feature could be abused, since both players would have to agree to abort a match, and I mean, it's a custom game. There's nothing to win or lose here. So I just think that it'd be a convenient feature to have. The reason I really wanted to propose this feature though is more so because aborting the game would make your custom game room retain all of the settings that you made. A great example of where this would benefit people is team combos. You know, I gotta be biased for my folk, but let me elaborate a bit further. They often have to quit out of the game after hitting a combo to check the replay, but quitting out resets all of the game room settings. And while yes, I am aware that you can get back into your custom lobby by making all players quit in unison, I think that most players don't know about this supposed life hack, and having an option that's easy to find would simply serve as a better alternative for most players. Since I talked about aborting the game though, let's bring up a suggestion that's basically the polar opposite of that. How about having a button or an option that lets you instantly continue the queue after a match? Like, let's say you finish a ranked match, now press T to continue the queue with the same character, skipping the character selection screen and everything in between. It would save the player the hassle of mashing their buttons like a maniac to get through all of these screens, while also saving him a little bit of time. And I think small additions like these would really respect a player's time, since you're going to have to go through these screens thousands of times. Even saving a few seconds during this process will, in the grand scheme of things, save you a lot of time. Next up is something in the spectator mode. Remember the bar in the top right corner that I mentioned constantly in the UI section of this video? Yeah, if you're in spectator mode, you for some reason can't see these options, probably so people wouldn't break the game's UI, but it has always been one of those things where I thought, damn, would it be nice to have these settings while spectating. But all in all, spectator mode is pretty solid to begin with, so I wouldn't complain if this doesn't get added. I mean, this is a quality of life suggestion for a reason. It's not that important, it's just an idea to make people's lives easier. Something else that I wanted to touch upon though were the browser leaderboards like Brawlhalla or Brawlhalla's official ranked leaderboards, with the proposal at hand being, wouldn't it be pretty nice to have a ranking leaderboard that's integrated into Brawlhalla itself? Because like, it would make viewing the leaderboards a lot more accessible for people who play on console or Switch instead of computer. Next up though is a feature that has been requested by quite a lot of people. So many in fact that it was sent into the shadow realm because of how frequently it was requested on the Brawlhalla Reddit. And that would be character presets, where you can make presets for specific skins or characters to make the process of switching weapon skins, stances, and colors easier. This is convenient because every time you change skins, the game automatically reverts it back to the signature weapon of that skin, instead of the weapons that you used the last time. So if you have a lot of weapon skins, I wish you luck finding the weapon that you want to equip. And since we're on the topic of character customization, I would also like to bring up a proposal made by another player regarding the random-esque features of Brawlhalla. So what he suggested was that BMG should add the random option to more features of the game, spanning from random team emotes, random loading frames or UI themes, random sidekicks, and even randomized KO effects, with the KO effect re-rolling after every kill instead of every match. Now, I won't say that we need randomness for everything in this game, but having the option to customize a lot more things to be random would be cool to have nonetheless. The idea he pitched that I personally found exciting, however, was the option to randomize all aspects of your character, including the skin, color, weapon, and stance, which could be a nice way to negate Brawl's stale nature. Something else that the post also proposed was the ability to create a playlist of characters that you can get with random. Now, this is talking from personal experience, but every time I pick random, it basically goes along the lines of, please no Greatsword, please no Greatsword, oh no, I got Greatsword. And that is annoying. But in the end, all of these randomized suggestions are just ideas, but I do think that having more access to customizing these would be nice. And an additional feature that I'd love to see in the game would be the option to have all colors in custom 2v2, because as of right now, you can only pick the red or blue color in custom games, while beloved colors like black, Skyforge, or the seasonal colors just aren't available. Now, the reason why they don't allow you to use these colors is because they'd have to add extra variations of these colors in case a second, third, or fourth player joined in with the same character or skin, and it's reasonable for them not to do that. So what I'd like to see them do instead would be for them to handle it like they do in Ranked 2v2. In there, you can't pick special colors when you mirror pick the same character. If you do, it'll automatically revert you to the base color red or blue. So why not just implement this in custom 2v2 as well? If a team is using the same character or skin, just make it automatically switch to red or blue. And I feel justified in proposing this because beginners shouldn't be weirded out from this feature. Why? Well, because they don't have access to most of these colors yet. Meanwhile, more experienced players should be able to grasp the reasons behind its functionality. I have never heard someone complain in Ranked 2v2 about the fact that they can't play the same character with the same color, because it's obvious why the game doesn't allow it, and people are smart enough to understand that at least. Oh, and also, could we finally get a ping counter? Wink wink, nudge nudge, please? Although... we might know why that isn't getting added, but I think it's self-explanatory why a ping counter would be nice to have next to the internet bar. And lastly, I want to bring up something for the friends and clan list, which would be the ability to see if people are watching a replay or if they've been inactive for the past, let's say, half an hour. But that about wraps up all of my quality of life suggestions, so moving on, let's talk about community-made content. Here I want to make two proposals. The first will be to open the Steam workshop for community-made content such as custom map designs, UI designs, backgrounds, and things like changing a narrator's voice. You know, this guy.
Legendary!
These workshop items should be viewed more like little mods that you can use in Brawl, but what's important here is a little distinction I'm making. All of these examples I just gave don't affect Brawlhalla's core gameplay in a way where it can inherently give one player an advantage over the other. Something like, let's say, creating a skin would be overstepping that line, because that's an actual difference with your visuals in the middle of a round. This is ignoring the fact that people could just post already existing skins on the store. And while I would like to see fan-made skins in Brawlhalla, I think that they would also break BMG's pay model, and for that reason, they sadly aren't a viable addition to the game. But it is here that I want to bring forth my second proposal, and that would be to use the Steam workshop as a submission box for potential additions into the game. If you need an example of this idea in another game, well, then I'd have a perfect example for you. Team Fortress 2, which quite frankly is a game that I've never played myself, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a game that is very much run by its community nonetheless. People there can all submit their own ideas and creations into the workshop, the key difference here being that they can't be used in gameplay. But if they pass a certain criteria and are approved by the developers, then they'll be eligible to be added into the game. How BMG would compensate the developers of these mods, however, isn't something for me to decide. I just wanted to mention the second version of my proposal, as it could benefit players of all platforms if some of these features were curated and integrated into the game itself, since they're not exclusive to Steam anymore then. But to make this clear before anyone misunderstands me, I'm not saying that Brawlhalla should become a community-run game like Team Fortress 2, since committing yourself to such practices can be very unpredictable and unstable. What I'm saying is that adding an in-game workshop could be beneficial for Brawlhalla, as for one, it'd just be cool to see Blue Mammoth Games work hand in hand with its players in creating and shaping Brawlhalla, and many games in the past have already shown what amazing work can come out from community-made content, all of which BMG can approve and officially release in the store. And secondly, I believe this could also majorly improve the relationship and communication between the players and the devs, while also providing the devs with more time to work on other aspects of the game that aren't skins, such as gameplay changes, quality of life features, optimizations, improving the service, and so on, since now the community can actively give a helping hand to BMG by providing them with new material. What I want to talk about next though are some ideas that could improve the ranked experience. So, what I want to address first here is a complaint that I hear really fucking often in Brawl, and that is how unfair Brawlhalla's queues are. And in all honesty, that isn't really an unfounded complaint either, because sometimes you're just going to be matched up against players with an elo gap of 100, maybe 200, if not even more elo, which can be insanely frustrating for players, and because of that, people complain about it, rightfully so. The only change that I could come up with that could fix this problem would be to add an elo range that the player can control themselves. themselves. Let me give you an example. Let's say you only want to queue players 100 elo above and below you, then the game should allow you to set that up. If this were implemented in Brawlhalla, then the player would be responsible for who he queues, and BMG shouldn't be held accountable for the problem anymore. But before I move on, I should clarify some things about this idea. Firstly, this option should only be available in the elo ranges of, let's say, 1000 to 2200 elo. This is because the queues outside of these elo ranges have way less player activity. I think it's rather obvious that a Tim player with 750 elo wouldn't find the option to begin with, and by the time you reach Diamond, the game shouldn't handhold you anymore either, so if you can't deal with people with higher elo gaps anymore, then that's your problem to deal with in the upper leagues. I mean, that's how it currently is, and that shouldn't change in my opinion. But for everyone below that, so silver, gold, and plat, it would definitely make the game feel much more lenient on them, because let's be honest, getting queued up with someone that has like 500 more elo than you is ridiculous. Anyways, next I'd like to propose the implementation of player elo being displayed at the start of a match. Now, let me put this bluntly. I don't know why this is nothing in the game, and it's stupid that it isn't. Firstly, it wouldn't be very hard to incorporate into the game for BMG, and secondly, there's just no way of telling what your opponent's elo actually is with the current system. I kid you not, you can fight someone with the expectation of them being 2000 elo when in reality they are only 1800 elo, and it is because of this expectation that you played worse and now got scammed out of your elo. The problem is just, this game has too much subjective skill for you to actively decipher a player's rating purely based on gameplay, and depending on how they play, placebo will debuff you whether you like it or not. Of course you could argue that some people would just play worse if they knew their opponent's elo, because now there's a higher stake and more pressure on the player when you see someone with a bajillion less elo than you. But if that's a problem, then just make it a toggleable setting. That would literally fix all of those problems. And you know what's really funny? After conducting some research, I even found out that this was a feature in the past, and I honestly cannot, for the love of God, explain to myself why they took this feature out of the game. It's such a small detail that makes the game so much better, and it doesn't even look bad. So I really just don't get it. Moving on though, lastly I'd like to propose the addition of ranked settings to replace the teams on in ranked 1v1 and 2v2. There are two reasons for why I'm suggesting this. Firstly, do you really think anybody needs to know if teams are on or off outside of customs? Because I think people are intelligent enough to figure out if ranked 2v2 has teams enabled or not, you know? And while I could basically argue the same case for the rest of the options like licensed dogs, I just think the teams on should be the first choice to go because it's right next to the already existing settings. And secondly, I'm proposing these new ranked settings because they make it much more obvious to the player that ranked actually has settings that you can manipulate. I even gave the button the color red so it sticks out like a sore thumb. And the reason for that is because if you aren't clearly being led to this feature, people don't figure out on their own that you can choose whether you want gadgets to be on or off, what maps you'd like to ban, and that you can enable the tournament map set. At least I feel like most people don't know about these settings until either their friends tell them or they're way into their career already. Even now, I sometimes meet people who have played the game for longer than 100 hours who still don't know this stuff. Why? Because there's nothing that lets you in on the fact that these settings exist. Another benefit that comes with ranked settings, however, is the fact that there'd be more space for these settings now. That means if BMG added new ranked settings like crossover signatures on or off or the elo ranges to the already existing settings, then it wouldn't become too cluttered either. But really, the end goal of the suggestion is just so people can more easily find their way to these settings. I just feel like there's a real lack of transparency in the user interface here, but I've already talked extensively on that topic earlier. Anyways, we have finally made it to the end of this section, but before I conclude this whole debacle, I want to bring up something that I personally feel very strongly about. I've already mentioned that I got attached to Brawlhalla because of its movement. It was clear that it wasn't trying to be a Smash copy, and it had its own distinct features that made it unique. And while the game wasn't perfect, it tiptoed this line between a really fun game and something that had many broken features that all had their own merits though. While creating this video, I thought it makes sense to go way back and rekindle some memories that I've had of this game, meeting up with some old folk and also checking back on some really old videos that inspired me when I was a newbie. And it was when I was watching those older videos that I picked up on something. Combos used to have a lot more momentum and movement associated with themselves. But that begs the question, what changed? I mean, this change most definitely doesn't stem from any changes in the movement of the game. As a matter of fact, you could even say that players are more encouraged to play faster and more aggressively with the new dash changes. And well, the conclusion I came to when thinking about this was that in actuality, the problem comes with the changes that have been made to Brawlhalla's attacks, or to put it more bluntly, the balance changes the game has gotten over the years, most notably with weapons like Scythe, gauntlets, or lance. But let me give a more in-depth look at one attack specifically so you can understand what I'm trying to get at in the grand scheme of things, starring Scythe Reverse Nair. But first, Storytime. Back in 2018, I used to dig this weapon so hard. It felt like the perfect combination of everything that I liked about Brawlhalla packed into one single weapon. It gave you the ability to drag your opponents all over the place. It gave you more choices than other weapons, and most importantly, it played into the player's movement. You could literally start a combo and easily drag the opponent to the death barrier with quick succession. It felt satisfying and it hit right in the field. It was just the right amount of speed, and the kid even played into it. Don't believe me? Well, then let me introduce you to Old Scythe Ground Pound, which you use to throw to the side, making it perfect for combos like this, where you just soar through the skies at record speeds. But for the sake of balancing, or because it felt weird, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it weirded people out that the ground pound hit to the side. Both of these attributes were removed from the weapon. Now, don't get me wrong, Reverse Nair keeping full momentum was completely broken. I mean, even without it, people still complain about the weapon being way too good, but it's because I've experienced this iteration of the weapon that I just wish the Blue Mammoth games leaned more into this aspect of Brawlhalla where you just zoom across the stage, and I'm certain that I'm not the only one who was fond of those older versions of the weapons, where movement was more of a focal point in the kit. And while I understand that some of these nerfs were necessary for the weapon to not just annihilate everyone, I believe that there's more of a middle ground to be found. Currently, BMG is just lobotomizing these weapons purely for the sake of balancing the game, but in the process, they're also unintentionally removing some of the charm the weapons originally had. And I feel like the closest they've been to holding a balance between what's fun and what is balanced was in 2018. And I'm honestly baffled by how many changes they have made that just go against this design philosophy, despite how well suited Brawlhalla is for it. And one of the, in my opinion, most disappointing changes in this regard is Gauntlet's Dare, which now throws straight down, and it is probably something that I will never get used to. Visually, it doesn't feel like it should hit straight down, nor is it more fun than the older version where you would drag your opponents along the stage like a manic beast. I just don't get what the idea was behind this change. It felt like they took a core part of what Gauntlets was just to trash it straight into the garbage, without any regards to what the players thought. And that's why I made my wish such a vocal point. My wish that Blue Mammoth games were simply more open to the community about the changes they want to make with the game before they make those changes. I'm fine with them changing damage values or knockback or specific attacks, but I'd rather have them consult a bigger part of the community if they're going to change how a move behaves when that move is integral to how the weapon is played. And this is because they almost never run back a change they make. Heck, I can't even recall the time they did. That's why I never like to see these changes, because I know no matter how many people complain about something, or my friend circle that is, the moment one of these changes makes it to the light of day, there's no going back from it. Now, I can understand changes like Hammer and like not launching players into space, but doing something like Lancer losing its momentum midway through, it just doesn't feel right to me. It feels unnatural for the weapon, and it's purely there for balance's sake. I can accept nerfs and changes to moves, but I don't want to accept change when it comes at the detriment of a weapon's fields. It is hard to make a weapon feel nice and natural to play, so to ruin that honestly perplexes me. It also changes like the backside of Lance Nair not hitting, where Blue Mammoth Games can't even be bothered to change the animation so it actually fits the new hitbox. Like, I've been playing for 5 years and I still can't get my brain to like change to work around the fact that the backside doesn't hit because it used to be integral to my playstyle. But are these objective problems? No, they're my opinion, and there will be people who agree and people who disagree. But I do believe that this is an important aspect of Brawlhalla that Blue Mammoth Games should treat with more care. So with all of that said, it is finally time to move on to the end of the video. Or so I thought, until enough people bugged me to talk about this. That was fucking... Oh, I'm getting cooked, bro. I'm clip farming him. I'm clip farming him by making him clip me. Oh, shit! That's fucked! A custom game room. I want to ask this guy. He fucking called on my ass! I just wanted to ask for permission. No! Oh my god. This community is cooked, bro. They have zero faith in humanity.
I know.
It's so bad.
Bro, why did he just leave? What the fuck?
I know. Like, the thing is, it's like, what like went through my head is he probably thought I'm like asking, can I ask you a question? I say something like, is your mother dead?
Bro, I know.
You're not, fuck you.
I thought you were a toxic little shit, bro.
Yeah, that's so sad. Oh my god. Now that you've seen that section though, just keep it in mind, because I'll touch upon it later again. But first, let me just say this. I'll be real, I wasn't even sure if I should discuss this part of the game due to sheer amount of subjectivity, and originally, I even scrapped this part of the video, but most of my friends asked me to add it back to the video, so please hear me out on what I have to say. But before all of that, I should first clarify some things, starting with how people communicated in Brawlhalla and what has changed over the years. Now, in the past, there used to be a post-game chat for computer players, where people could communicate with each other after finishing the match. This feature, however, was removed by Blue Mammoth Games in response to all of the toxicity that jumped out of it, instead implementing an emoji system that can be used on all platforms. Now, what I'd also like to preface here is that the chat wasn't necessarily removed because of toxicity, because if you read the original patch notes 6.0, Moon and the new features, you will see how the developers say, quote, since post-game chat was a feature only available on the Steam client and did not exist between platforms, it has been replaced by the emoji system. It is still available in character select, mid-match for spectators, custom lobbies, matchmaking lobbies, and the main menu for clans on PC and Mac. To which I say, yeah, right. I think we all know why it actually got removed. But with all of that clarified, I think it's time for me to actually talk about Brawlhalla's community. Now, from my years of playing and interacting with Brawlhalla's player base, I have come to the conclusion that the community isn't as toxic as people make it out to be. If anything, it's more so the fact that players want to perceive it as such. And while sure enough, thinking back on my experiences, I've probably been called every slur under the sun, my family probably would have met the death sentence more than once, and if the people in the chat actually followed through on their promises, multiple war crimes would have been committed because of this game. But from what I have seen, I just concluded that people don't hate you specifically, but more so the way you play. This game can be infuriating to play. Actually, no, scratch that. It is infuriating to play. People get pissed off left and right, and they need some way to vent those feelings out. And how else, other than to be toxic towards the opponent, the very object that is making you mad. After all, Brawlhalla is a competitive game, and the issue is that most people feed into this vicious cycle due to the reputation of the game. Everyone already knows everyone is toxic, everyone is a horrible human being, and everyone is out to get your ass. And when that is the expectation you're working off of, then of course you're going to cultivate a toxic environment. But what I am going at here is the fact that the people behind the screens are normal people. I mean, I'm pointing out the obvious here, but I feel like it has to be said, because if people refuse to see that part of the community, then it'll be impossible to cultivate better sportsmanship. But before I yap on, let me try to give you an example of why I think this is the case. The example being the way people treat me and my teammate. To put it very simply, everybody is super toxic to him. They simply despise him, yet they've always been super nice to me. Now, why is that? We are part of the same team, so shouldn't we both be hated equally? Well, no, because he's a 6 spammer whilst I just played normally. The problem is, if you want to win in this game, more often than not, you will need to play in a way that most people will consider bottom of the barrel, hot garbage. What you're doing there, the character you're picking, it's going to make me cry. All of these things. It just rubs people the wrong way, because it doesn't feel great to get beaten up by a metaphorical trashback who runs away, nor does it feel great to get beaten up by someone who spams their way to victory. Everyone can talk themselves into saying, oh, it's my fault for losing, I just wasn't good enough at dealing with their playstyle. But doing that becomes infinitely harder the moment you fight against something that you genuinely cannot respect, no matter how well-faithful you want to be. But if you genuinely seek out a proper conversation with your opponent, they will almost always turn out to be completely normal human beings like you and me. The big problem is just, why even attempt to have a conversation with someone who just says KYS in the old system or spams the core thumbs down emoji in the new system? You don't. Now, I know nobody will relate with this because all of my friends feel like I'm uttering fairy tales and bullshit, but I have found it genuinely difficult to find people who are toxic through and through. And the fact that the Brawlhalla community isn't as toxic as people say becomes very apparent when you actually decide to interact with it. I dare you, join any of the Brawlhalla discourse and you will usually be met with incredibly nice people, and the same applies to the Brawlhalla Reddit. The people there won't wish you mental anguish because you never did them any harm in game. I don't think it's outlandish to say that people have the capacity to accept a loss against someone they genuinely consider to be the better player, but equally so, they will feel bummed out when they lose to someone or something that takes quote-unquote less skill than what they themselves do. And it's just in the general nature of fighting games to become easily enraged by what's happening to you on screen right now. But just because it's easier to get mad in fighting games doesn't mean that I won't fault players for their wrongdoings. I do believe that players should seek out better sportsmanship in game, no doubt, but I also get that it's easy for people to vent their frustration out on their enemies. But personally, I'm the type of guy who finds fault in himself for losing to my opponent. Like, if I lose because they 6-spammed, that's my problem. I was just too ass at dealing with that playstyle, so I should just get better. Oh, he absolutely demolished and free-stalked me because he was incredibly passive and didn't engage a single time? Then I should maybe take a different approach for fighting him into consideration. And if there really is not a single reason in the world that you should have lost a fight, and you can't reason your loss into something that isn't just crashing out in front of your opponent and getting screenshotted out of it, then at least go and say something like, wow, cringe. I lost because the character my opponent played is really unfair, instead of blaming the player himself and wishing that his house burned down. Like, Yes, the community should try to be more level-headed, but I feel like you're incredibly wrong if you brand everyone in this game as some dumbass, because that's just not true. And even though I know that this might be difficult for people to do, and it's completely fine to struggle with being level-headed, I at least want to put forth one question, and this won't apply to everyone. Do you really think it's worth wasting time inviting people to your room just to say easy, or spam the core thumbs down emoji? Yes? Well, then I have nothing more to tell you. But if no, then please stick with that sentiment and don't. Trust me, both you and your opponent's time are worth more than that. And if you genuinely think someone is better than you, then feel free to seek them out for help. If you show good manners, then most people will extend a helping hand out to you. And I hope that more people could realize this fact. But this is where I have to put a halt to my whole argument, because all of this is me talking about my experiences when post-game chat still existed. The thing is, it doesn't anymore, and with its removal, the game's culture has completely changed. Now, as a heads up, I will not be level-headed in this section. This is very much based on emotions. Think about it like this. Before post-game chat was removed, you were basically forced into a conversation with your opponent. The only way to dodge it would be either to blend out what they're saying or to just quit before they could even utter a word. In contrast, nowadays you need to invite the player to your lobby, and because of the culture that is cultivated by this game where everyone just wants to go at each other's throats, everyone is also going in with the expectation that when they're being invited, they're going to get trash talked, no matter what impression they have of the other person. In the past, I could just really quickly throw out a genuine compliment and have a nice conversation and make friends, because people were reciprocative. But now, you can say a sentence, and if it even remotely looks like you're about to be toxic, they will just leave on you, just like it happened in that one clip I showed earlier. And that is genuinely frustrating to me. I kid you not, I have made more than 100 friends in the time that post-game chat existed, but ever since it was removed, I probably haven't even made 5. That is ridiculous, and just about every person who was a part of that era that I know misses the existence of that thing, because the present toxicity of the post-game chat was at least fun to get hit with, because it came and went as fast as a gust of wind, and people actually tried with their insults, as funny as that sounds. Meanwhile now, you have to volunteer yourself to join that room with the expectation to get hit over by a rock. It has genuinely sucked out so much of the fun I've had in this game, and I feel like so many others have quit for this very same reason. Now, let me quickly go over a few quick points. Number 1, most people haven't even experienced the post-game chat because they joined the game after it had already been removed. Number 2, this problem only pertains to the PC platform of the game, so in the grand scheme of things, you can just argue that this might be irrelevant to Brawlhalla in its entirety anyway. Number 3, I disagree, I don't like having toxicity in my face, please don't add the post-game chat back to the game, to which I argue, just give us the option to turn the post-game chat off and make the default setting for it to be fucking off, like it's not that hard. Number 4, Ubisoft owns BMG, and honestly, I'm pretty certain that they are the reason why the chat is gone to begin with, because I do in fact believe that the devs are level-headed enough to understand what a glorious experience this fucking box was for the community, but do they have any control over this decision? Probably not. I would genuinely just assume that they're told to make this game as user-friendly as possible so they can get as many people to purchase the rip-off prices that are skins. But like, no, seriously. $30 for an Ascended skin is fucking ridiculous. But looking aside, the problem with that sort of mentality is that these changes that are supposedly trying to help the player just drive people away because it makes the game boring as fuck. Now, I already signed up to this loser mentality that this thing will never make it back to the light of day again, and I genuinely believe that this will be one of my main reasons that I'll never play this game actively again. I love this game, but I love a version of it that is already long gone, and this video is my final tribute to the game. Like, Sure, I'll still touch the game from time to time because it is fun, but it's just not the same thing anymore. I feel like the social aspect of this game was just integral to the experience, but they have just made it infinitely harder to actually interact with people because this new system of having a new interaction by inviting the player is flawed by design. And as stupid as it sounds, I personally feel like this invite person to your lobby system is infinitely more toxic than the older one because all of the good parts of the old system were lost in translation, and that's horrible. And honestly, I don't even know how to lead back into the video again, because originally, this whole personal rant of mine wasn't even in the video. I made it a mantra for myself to not get too personal with my feelings in this video, because this is a critique, and I feel like there should be a certain amount of level-headedness to it. But now that I'm slowly making it to the end of finishing this project, I feel like I'd regret it not to have an emotional crash out about this game that I've wasted my past 2 years writing about. So now, I wasted 4 minutes of your time crashing out about it in front of you. I hope you forgive me. But in all seriousness, I can talk here as much as I want, but no matter how true I believe the things that I say to be, I don't think there will be change. I'd love to be proven otherwise, but I genuinely think that even if the developers wanted to, their hands are tied. At least I hope this to be the reason, because if the game genuinely did fall off because of their decisions, I am going to fucking lose it. But to slowly lead to the end of the video, I guess my personal appeal to the community is, I believe that this community is great. The PC part of it. I mean, for crying out loud, the other people can't even communicate. They have motherfucking emojis, bro. But with the removal of post-game chat, that opinion I have has been stripped completely naked just because it changed the dynamics of how everyone treats each other completely. And really, all I can ask for is that you, the viewer, try to interact more with the players in good faith. Heck, treat it as an experiment even, but we need to start somewhere at least, right? I mean, you can't cultivate good sportsmanship no matter how good-mannered you are if everyone actively ignores every single person they come across. It's as those sayings go, don't wait for change. Be the change. It's cringe as fuck, but I think it perfectly describes what this problem here is. But before I yap on more, I will first blend in a lot of extra ideas and opinions on the screen that I've had during the discussions I had with some of my friends. I firmly believe that my opinion on the community isn't correct. Everyone has their own interpretation, so I thought this would be the best way to make up for my clearly biased views. So if you're interested, read into them and make your own opinion of this topic. Now with that out of the way, let me properly segue into the original ending of this section. Thanks for listening. Now, I'm aware that a lot of people won't agree with what I'm saying here, and that is fine. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion and experiences, but as someone who saw both the good and the bad, I really don't believe that most people are justified in saying that the entire Brawlhalla community is shitty, when the majority isn't even trying to properly interact with the people that are in it. So to those who think that the community is unsalvageable, I'd beg you to reconsider. But with that, my rant on the community is done, and we can finally wrap this video up properly. Thanks. I don't have a sliver of a doubt that Brawlhalla has the potential to become one of, if not the most popular platform fighting game there is. Not to say that it isn't fucking massive already. It has so many things going for it that make it stand out from other platform fighters, yet I feel like there are so many problems that are holding it back. Brawlhalla is by no means an inherently bad game, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it could be so much better. If anything, I just want to see Brawlhalla succeed, and despite all of the breaks I have taken from this game, I still come back again and again, because the foundation on which Brawlhalla is built on is amazing. It just lacks the structure and finishing touch to truly become something stellar. But while it is an enticing game, I also have to say that Brawlhalla is kind of a difficult game to build upon, since In essence, it was designed to be a couch party game where you're mostly meant to spam 6 and have fun, not for it to have a massive esports surrounding it with massive cash on the line. Basically, all of the novel mechanics and strings for that matter weren't intended for such a massive game, and the devs most likely didn't know where to take their creation from this point on either. Mechanically, the game feels almost like a blank canvas since most characters share so many similarities in gameplay, yet the movement gives the player so much freedom to the point where it doesn't matter that most characters aren't complex. You will constantly realize that there are new things you could innovate on, and that is what Brawlhalla's greatest strength is, the creativity and freedom it allows for the players surrounding their movement. But that also comes at the detriment of the fact that there will always be a counter to creativity, and in most cases this seems to be the floaty, or how others would refer to it, passive gameplay that so many people complain about. And there will always be people who will choose to win over trying to grow as a player, and no matter what the developers will do to counter these problems, the meta will evolve to find a new counter, and nothing short of game breaking can be done to remedy this problem. So as sad as it might be, this is an inherent issue with Brawlhalla that can't be fixed. But saying that this is Brawlhalla's fault would be cringe as fuck. I mean, think about it, this is an inherent problem that exists within every fighting game to some degree. Although that isn't to say that Blue Mammoth Gang should take it easy just because of that. Because while Brawlhalla may be a bajillion times more polished than it was back in, like, let's say 2016, it honestly isn't good enough to the point where it can run on its own 2 feet yet either. What I mean with that is just, it's not good enough to the point where developers could just stop updating it and have it stand the test of time just on its own merit. I understand if the rather slow development across the past few years was because the developers wanted to take a safe route developing this game, but is it really worth it at the price of letting the game's potential rot? I don't think so. There are plenty of games that barely get updated, but those kinds of games are usually in perfect balance with their already existing content, or to put it in simpler terms, they're just finished games in their own right. I know, a crazy concept to bring up in this day and age. And even then, there are some examples that continue development just for the sake of making the game better. Now, where does Brawlhalla fall into the spectrum? Well, it kind of does and doesn't fall into it. Does it get actively updated? Yes. It basically gets a monthly update, usually starring one big feature, for example, a crossover, a battle pass, a new character, or balance changes, something like that. What I want to say though is that this pace of updates feels way too slow. To put into perspective, they added the first preview of the more elaborated on tutorial mode almost a year ago now, and I thought, shit, maybe I don't have to argue how lacking the tutorial mode is, but here I am, a year later, and it still isn't finished. Like, sure, it's nice that they're taking their time working on it, but if it takes them this long to get one feature finished, then what's with all of the other things that they have to spend time with developing? I honestly can't say. And it feels like I'm beating a dead horse at this point saying it again, but I really wish the devs were more straightforward and transparent about what they're working on. I just can't stress the fact more that we simply don't know what the developers are thinking, especially when they appear with their additions that just completely come out of left field. Not to say that they can't do that, but I feel like giving way to a community poll or something of that nature when they want to make any instrumental changes to the game would show a deeper level of care for your community. And even if the majority of the community won't come to respond to your questions, just because most people won't show up doesn't mean that asking for feedback before implementing something is meaningless. Quite the contrary, actually. There's a lot of meaning to consulting people on how they feel about a certain thing in the game, and whether some changes are really required or not. And before anyone misunderstands me, I want to clarify I'm only making this distinction for things like quality of life changes or how the game feels to play, not balance changes like the force of a move. Those should by no means be in the player's hands. The thing is, if you want to make your game feel better to play, or more enjoyable to play, then who better to ask than the players themselves? And before anyone tries to argue that too many quality of life additions trivialize a game's experience like modded does in a lot of other games, I simply don't believe that this applies to the quality of life content that Brawlhalla could get. And don't forget, even if BMG makes a mistake, whether that be unbalancing or something else entirely, they can always go back on it and just patch it out of the game on the following update. It's fine to make mistakes if you can learn from them, but it sucks when you don't. There is no shame in going back on a decision, and just because you're implementing something new doesn't mean that you have to double down on it. And that is the beauty of a game that can always be updated into a better and more improved version of itself. Now, I'm not trying to push an insane standard onto Brawlhalla and its developers here. They don't have the capital of a AAA studio, but I do believe that BMG should strive for the best they can do regardless of that. I do not wish for the game to die, and it won't. But even then, I want to see it grow and thrive more than it already does instead of its player count dropping. I want it to become something greater than what any of us could envision, and I think everyone who plays Brawlhalla wishes for the game to improve to some degree at least. I mean, why else would we spend our time with it? All of us have a limited amount of time on this planet, and we want to do the things we do to feel like a worthy investment of our time, and this extends to the games we consume as well. And all of the things that I've mentioned in this video are just the tip of the iceberg. There is so much that could be done for this game, but what I mostly wanted to tackle here with this video were the more obvious problems I saw with Brawlhalla. I will stand by my point that this game has a ton of potential, but what it needs is for Blue Mammoth Games to take a step in the right direction by picking up the pace and experimenting more. But to reference back to the beginning of the video, I want to say this again. I made this video in good faith. If I didn't like Brawlhalla, I wouldn't have gone for the stress of creating this absolute mess of a project. And honestly, I am so happy to have finished this video. And before anyone marches off, let me make this very clear. Please don't use this video as a means of attacking the developers or any of the people mentioned in this video for that matter. Other than that, I only want to say none of the things I say in this video are objective. They are simply what I think about the game and the conclusions that I've come to when trying to critique it. The proposals I've made are just my personal ideas to improve the game. That by no means says that they're perfect and everyone has to agree with them. We are all entitled to our own opinions, and I most definitely don't have the best ideas there are. I firmly believe that the best way of finding newer, better ideas and proposals is through discussion, and not just for some nutsack like me to rant on for 4 hours. So really, feel free to speak your own opinion. And with those final words, I really want to say thanks for watching. Wow, we really made it to the end. Now, if you want more of this, then don't subscribe, because I'm not planning on making more videos about Brawlhalla. Even if this video gains traction, my goal isn't to become a popular Brawlhalla YouTuber. I do this for fun, and there are other things I simply want to talk more about. I feel like I've done my part making this video. If you are interested in me though, and would watch me regardless of the content, then do feel free to subscribe though. There are simply more different avenues that I'm interested in, other games that I love and other things that I want to talk about. I don't do YouTube as a job, I do it as a hobby. I just want to have a positive impact on the media that I so dearly love. As the video outro is rolling now though, I want to give a massive thanks to Gaspberries for proofreading my probably like 200 pages worth of text. Trust me, it would be really funny whenever I just sent him paragraphs upon paragraphs and just said, please thanks bro. LME2305 for gathering so many clips for me that were super specific and just a massive hassle to farm, as well as being the first person that helped me think up points in this video, as well as being my lovely teammate who always takes the brunt of insults in my stead. Malachi for changing my mind and literally making me rewrite the whole script one more time because I was more of a dickhead to the developers in the old iteration. I'm sorry. And all of the support that all of my friends have given me throughout this project. All the kind words and praise for creating this despite my slow working ass. Trust me, I have met burnout and second thoughts so often on the journey of creating this video, and I still don't feel like I'm cut out for making videos, but I'm looking forward to trying more in the future. Maybe. But as this is a Brawlhalla related video, I just want to say to everyone watching this, thanks. I really do appreciate you watching this. And please enjoy Brawlhalla for what it is rather than hating it for its flaws. have a great day. Thanks.